Okay. So often we hear about the fall of Rome and the beginning of the Dark Ages. And the first thought often comes to mind among scholars and popular audiences alike is that Christianity has something to do with it, that this belief system was part of the fall of this great empire, leading to a backward, barbaric, and illiterate age full of violence and of course setting back the advancement of civilization far back, whether ethics or technology, by thousands of years. uh, Even Edward Gibbon, in his Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, believed Christianity was somehow one of the reasons for the fall of Rome, declaring the church and even the state were distracted by religious factions whose conflicts were sometimes bloody and always implacable. The attention of the emperors was diverted from camp to synods. The Roman world was oppressed by a new species of tyranny, and the persecuted sects became the secret enemies of their country, unquote. Now, without a doubt, Christianity participated in some way to the fall of Rome, but how and what does this exactly mean is what we're going to be investigating today. As for the Dark Ages, the word alone suggests so much. And again, what does this really mean? What really happened? What was the actual role of Christianity in this crisis? And how much of the story is a spin, is rhetoric, is revisionism? So we're going to go ahead. So be prepared to really hear the story according to the historical and archaeological evidence on hand. Now, let's go to the first image here. And we're going to see a map of the Roman Empire. So during its height in the first and second centuries, the Roman Empire covered an incredible stretch of territory, inclusive of all the land around the Mediterranean Sea and stretching west to Britain and east to the Persian Gulf, north to the Rhine and Danube rivers, and south to the Sahara Desert. An efficient network of paved roads facilitating the movement of troops, as well as a lively trade network, covered all this territory. While the empire encompassed many diverse ethnic groups and cultures, for the most part, they lived together in peace and were governed by a somewhat fair and standardized set of laws. Now, communication was easily facilitated because of the dominance of two languages: Latin, which dominated more in the West, and Greek, which dominated more in the East. With that said, most of the educated spoke both languages fluently. About one third of those living in the Roman Empire were literate, and the rest were either semi literate, which means they could sign their name and make out important words, or participated in literate interactions, being read to on a regular basis. So by this period, you had a plethora of people writing personal letters and even graffiti on the walls. Ancient Rome even had a daily gazette. Let's go to the next image. Get to capture this age here. So the Romans were engineering geniuses, creating raised aqueduct systems to bring running water from faraway streams to various urban settings, having plumbing in most of the public structures and some of the private homes, and even vast sewers. The Romans employed the arch as a means of making more solid structures, encompassing wider areas of space, and used poured concrete as well. Fine cities, as we see here, this is Rome, and there were many of them, were carefully designed and laid out in a grid pattern. Let's go to the next picture. Romans built temples of gleaming marble with fine columns and colonnades, great theaters, hippodromes, two-story covered shopping malls, vast libraries, and public baths. Let's go to the next image. The public baths were later complete with hot and warm baths and big cold baths, reading rooms, exercise facilities, running tracks, and even snack shops. Let's go to the next image. Archaeologists have determined that you stored your clothes in lockers, much like today. Romans lived in villas and apartments, sometimes as high as 6 to 8 stories high. They ate at roadside diners and restaurants with a variety of foods, many gourmet. Let's go to the next image. Look at that. I mean, it was a very beautiful age. Obviously, they had great gardens, manicured with all kinds of trees and plants and flowers brought in from all over the Roman world. So they were adept at gardening too and planning out these wonderful green spaces that were sprinkled throughout the ancient city of Rome and other Roman cities. Let's go to the next image. But as for the people, although slavery was still part of society, not all slaves suffered the way they did in other historical periods. Non-criminal slaves within agriculture and urban settings were required by law to receive what's called a pecunium. What's a pecunium? That's actually an allowance. And if they carefully saved it up, they could actually eventually buy their freedom. In fact, many former slaves lived all about the Roman Empire. And before you think there would be a stigma attached to this, I will say that a freedman could become very wealthy, very rich, and their children could rise to the highest offices in the land, even the position of Roman emperor. As for many of the other luxury lifestyle aspects, it was not impossible even for the very poor. The very poor had some chance to enjoy the good life. For example, everyone could enjoy free public entertainments and were expected to go to the public baths every day, making the Romans a very clean people indeed. Because of the ample food supply, most Romans did not go hungry during this time period. Some enjoyed prolonged banquets. Indulgences was common, and physical pleasures too. Also, especially in the East, philosophical debates were common, as was the interest in educational pursuits in general at various centers of learning. Yet, this peace and prosperity did not last because of a shift in the weather in the latter part of the second century, causing famines and the sudden inroads of Germanic barbarians being pushed over the Roman frontiers because the Huns behind them were also moving. The empire experienced a momentary weakness during the reign of Marcus Aurelius. He reigned between 161 to 180 CE. Now, because of his natural abilities, Marcus Aurelius was able to push back the Marconi and the Quadi and the Sarmatians, but they were only the first of many groups who would now attempt to break through the Roman frontier. While the Romans were able to defeat the Parthians in the east, well, they brought back with them, unfortunately, a devastating plague that wiped out so many, and that took about a decade for life to return to normal. By the reign of Commodus, 180 to 192, who is the son of Marcus Aurelius, the empire was thriving again. Although the emperor himself, I'd say, was rather unfit to rule and neglected the defense of the frontier. In fact, he styled himself as a gladiator or Hercules in the flesh. Following a Roman civil war that included the short rule of Pertinax and Didius Julianus, a certain emperor known as Septimius Severus came to the throne and ushered in the last stable dynasty that would be experienced until even the 4th century, ruling from 193 to 211. The empire flourished as before, however, after this temporary hiatus, and continued to do so under his son Caracalla. And what does Caracalla do? Well, this is, of course, the document right here. He granted Roman citizenship to all free men. According to Cassius Dio, this was the reason why he made all the people in his empire Roman citizens. Nominally, he was honoring them, but his real purpose was to increase his revenues by this means, inasmuch as aliens did not have to pay most of these taxes, unquote. Also, by making all the free men Roman citizens, the Constitutio Antoninea permitted them to serve in the army, for only Roman citizens before could serve in the military. So, well, it makes a lot of sense. Increasing the tax base and available soldiers was a very wise move, especially in perspective of what was to come. After the short rule, so thank you so much for showing me that. But you can see this is the document here, one of many. During the short rule of the Berber Macrinius, the Severus dynasty continued with Elagabalus, 218 to 222, who was rather unfit to rule. He spent most of his time worshiping the great Syrian goddess of his roots. And then, of course, Severus Alexander, 222 to 235, who was indeed fit to rule, but who did not have the military experience necessary to fight the barbarians who were beginning to pressure again the Roman frontier. He tried at first diplomacy and then bribery to convince them to leave the empire alone. Such actions caused him, unfortunately, to lose a lot of respect of the army and open the way for an opportunist in a certain Maximinus Thrax. What a name! Maximinus Thrax, who would become the next Roman emperor. By the way, I want to mention that in the middle of the reign of Severus Alexander, a new threat also rose in Persia, for in 226 CE, the Iranian monarch known as Ardashir came to the throne. He declared himself Shah Shan, which means King of Kings, and established the Sassanids because they were descendants from Sassan. Now, Ardashir envisioned a new Persian empire, and by the reign of his son Shapur, the Romans were already under attack all along the eastern frontier. With the rise of Maximinus Thrax, a new brand of emperor came to the forefront with imperial might based upon military expertise. And of course, that becomes very important against the constantly invading barbarians from the northeast and, of course, the Sassanid Persians in the east. Now, I gotta tell you, Maximinus Thrax, unfortunately, he is a rather simple-minded emperor. He thinks that blunt force is everything, and he is under the impression that the gods of Rome are angry. They are upset. There have been all these natural disasters that have been going on. They have been losing various battles. And what will happen, we'll develop this a little bit further, but what happened is he was looking for a scapegoat, looking for somebody to blame. And who would be the blame? Well, see, here's where it gets more complicated. And this goes into the imperial cult. In the imperial cult, obviously, a Roman emperor is an emperor because of three powers. The three powers being imperator, which is, of course, connected to power related to the military. He's the commander in chief of the military. Also, princeps. Princeps, of course, is the first citizen. He is the representative of the people to the Senate in general and to the gods. Right? He is the will of the people. He's the embodiment of the people and represents them fully. And then, of course, finally, you have Pontifex Maximus, which is head of the Roman religion. So the Roman public religion. So he's involved in that. And with that comes the imperial cult. The imperial cult, of course, is connected initially with Augustus Caesar. Long story really short, Julius Caesar. He adopts Octavian as his son. Octavian's actually his nephew. And so what happens is Julius Caesar, as you know, dies, right? He is murdered on the steps in front of Pompey's theater. And so, unfortunately, people are pretty upset because Julius Caesar, even though he saw himself as the embodiment of the people, and the Senate hated him, he did lots of good things for Rome. He really helped change it in a positive sense and made it prosperous. So the populace are pretty angry. So what happened is Augustus Caesar, he put, who's of course, he's Octavian, he'll become Augustus Caesar. He puts his father in what's kind of like a rotisserie. He puts him on the rostrum, which kind of moves his body back and forth. They can see the fact that he's being stabbed all over the place. People get really angry. And you can see he's connecting to popular sentiment. There's one moment when Octavian, who will become Augustus, is looking at the sky during the father's funeral. He sees a star, and of course, long story again, really short, it's declared that that star is the apotheosis of dear old dad, Julius Caesar. So it becomes Julius the god, and henceforth it becomes now Augustus, or Octavian at this time, who's become Augustus, will become son of God. And that this is before Christianity. This is like, so some time before it. So now you have Augustus, son of God, savior. And you can see where this is a problem. And so this becomes part of the imperial cult. And so if you are a loyal Roman, you are going to make sure that you pledge your allegiance to the emperor. And what happens with each subsequent emperor, one emperor dies, becomes a god, dedicated as a god, and the next emperor becomes son of God. And then when that emperor dies, they become a god, and the next emperor becomes son of God, on and on and on. That's kind of how it works. The famous saying, of course, of Vespasian, the Emperor Vespasian, before he died, he said, "Oh, I think I'm becoming a god." It just became an expectation. There's a few that didn't become gods, but Tiberius did, and Claudius did, and Vespasian did, and Titus did, and you get the idea. So the imperial cult is, in order for you to be patriotic, you should be a part of this. Now, I want to mention something else, which is kind of problematic. And of course, obviously, we're talking about Christianity in regards to this whole big issue. So I do have to kind of give you a cliff notes here. The problem is that in Christianity, you have the idea that Jesus is the Son of God. You have the idea that Jesus is a savior. Now, even though this is a couple decades later when Jesus is born, remember, Jesus is born during the reign of Augustus Caesar, right? What happens is, even though Christians understand these ideas theologically as very separate, Romans can't tell the difference. You say Son of God, you say Savior, and what? You're saying this to Jesus? Jesus is not the Roman emperor. And then they hear things like, "Oh, what do you mean? Jesus, wasn't he crucified by Pontius Pilate? So wasn't he a Roman criminal?" And you say he's Son of God and Savior, and even though all our rhetoric and inscriptions and coins say that it's the emperor, you're saying, "Oh, wait, you're saying Jesus is coming back? Is he going to destroy the Roman Empire?" Oh, no. So you can see already Christians are looked at as potential insurrectionists. People really do believe it. We have primary sources that talk about this. But the interesting part is, on top of all that, Christians were very secretive. And that causes some problems too. People are suspicious of secretive individuals, and then they kind of get hearsay. One bit of hearsay they get is the fact that they have this secret feast. They have an agape feast, which means love. They have a love feast. You can see where Roman imaginations are kind of going wild. Love feast. What are they doing in this love feast? In the bad section of town, and then they're kissing, brother and sisters in Christ, and all they see is kissing, and that's not your sister, and that's not your brother. And so you get this idea that they're involved in incest, and then they hear this about this body and the blood, and they're taking this or partaking of this, and so it's like, wait a minute, maybe they're Maybe they're cannibals, edible feasts, body, blood, and maybe killing babies too. And these rumors start to get really crazy. Even though, again, Christians aren't practicing this, you have these rumors spreading. So already Christians are not looking very good. And you do have sporadic persecutions even before the time of Maximinus Threx. You have one where Nero does that, right? He did the fire of Rome. The center of Rome is burned in 64. And what happens? Who does he blame? He blames the Christians because they are so depraved and they hate the human race. And Tacitus, who writes about this event, talks about this fact that Nero did this and built his golden house right in the middle, right? so, so that's another interesting bit here. And then you have more persecution sporadic during the time of Domitian, and you have stories of John the Apostle going through being tested by Domitian, as well as the grandsons of Jude. So it happens. It happens periodically. But I'll tell you what the problem is, and this feeds into where we're going. The problem is, I told you that a Roman emperor is a Roman emperor based on three powers, right? Based upon representative of the people in princeps. Number two, imperator, which is head of the military. Number three, head of the Roman religion. You got it? Well, here's the problem. Under the empire, the Senate becomes weak. Why that is important is that, remember, the emperor is princeps. He's representative of the people before the Senate. And if the Senate has not much to say, they're not powerful, then what's the whole point? This starts as early as the Emperor Tiberius, when he goes into a Senate meeting and he asks them what they want when a certain initiative. He says, "Do you guys want this?" And they're all, "Yeah, we want that." And he goes, "But maybe you want this," which is the actual opposite of what he said earlier. And they're all, "Yeah, we want that." "Well, you like this? You like this?" "Wait, you can't like both." And so what he did is he walked out of the Senate chamber and he said in Greek, "Men fit to be slaves." Hoo-hoo. So we had the tripod of power of the emperor being those three powers. What happens is by the time we get to Septimius Severus, that tripod becomes two legs. And that is, a Roman emperor is a Roman emperor because he is connected to the military and is connected to religion. Got it? Okay, so that means when we get, we have a few emperors that are sympathetic to Christians. Severus Alexander is very sympathetic to Christians. In fact, what he does is he actually has been recorded in some sources that he had by his bed, by his larum, he had an image of Abraham and Christ, as well as Orpheus and other deities. So he seemed to adopt aspects of Christianity. And there were Christians in the household, in his household, well, maybe his, but we know Domitian's girlfriend was connected, was a Christian. So we do have this. But what happens is that Christianity is not approved of. In fact, as early as the Emperor Trajan, in a correspondence with Pliny, they actually put together a test to see if you are a Christian or not, and how to cleanse you of such a thing. For example, if you're a Christian or thought to be a Christian, Pliny the Younger is instructed by the Emperor Trajan. Pliny at that time is the governor of Bithynia, and the instruction is as follows, which I don't know, I'm laughing, it's terrible. So what happens is that, first of all, you have to make sure that you sprinkle incense before the image of the emperor. Make sure that you declare for the gods of Rome. And third, finally, you have to curse Christ. And if you do all three of those, then you're clear about any charges. If not, then you're in trouble. You're thrown in prison, or if you're a Roman citizen, you're off to Rome. So you do have this, but it's still sporadic. It's nothing, because again, they're thinking maybe these people are insurrectionists. In fact, Pliny himself says that he, in the province of Bithynia, he himself says that he stopped the Christians from expanding because when he made it illegal for political associations to meet. And he said, wait, political association. So he's asserting that Christians are a political association. He's been put in a religion category in that context. He also he tells the emperor that they eat the food, but this kind of food that they eat is of a harmless kind as opposed to a harmful kind, because remember the idea of cannibalism. So we do have this precedent, but still, for the most part, Christians are more or less left alone. There's persecutions, it's sporadic, but now we get to Maximinus Thrax. And Maximinus Thrax is nervous. He is thinking that the prayers of the Christians towards their God is getting in the way of the prayers of the Romans to their gods to win the battles, to do well economically, yeah. And so he decides that what we need to do is we need to kill all the leaders of the church. So he orders a persecution of the bishops. He decides that the best way, because he's a general, he thinks the best way to end Christianity as a threat is to kill the leaders. Don't kill all the Christians, just kill the leaders. And so that's what he does. He goes systematically, he arrests the two popes of Rome at that time. Yeah, there were two, because there was a division amongst them at that time. Basically, another story I'll tell you another time is that the Church of Rome was divided. One believed that the Gospel of John, the book of Revelation, all that was not permitted, should not be part of their readings and part of their tradition. They think it fueled a group known as the Montanists. And so that's that one group. And then you have another group under Hippolytus who says, no, Gospel John is great. They're Johannine Christians. So it's actually split between Peter Pauline Christians and Johannine Christians. Yeah. So the emperor, he exiles the two popes off to the island of Sardinia. And according to the story, they of course, they died there doing hard labor. But at the very end, they decided that why would we have the schism in the first place? And they decided to reunite the Church of Rome. By the way, that schism started all the way in the year 202. So from 202 to 235, the Church of Rome had two popes. So people don't know that. And the reason why that was is the Emperor Septimius Severus realized that the Montanists, this Christian branch, which is largely female, was causing too many converts. It was causing a big problem. And he made a law that in the year 202 that no more people can convert to Christianity. If you're a Christian already, that's okay. You just can't convert over. So already it's kind of slice and dice, scary situation, but that was later reversed. But now we have Maximinus Thrax, and he goes, all right, I'm going to kill them all. And he does a pretty terrible job at it. But I mean, he does it, but he's kind of a thug. I mean, look at the Thrax. So he dies. And with his death, that momentary persecution of the Christians does end. Now, what happens, however, is important, is that one emperor followed another in constant succession after that. And civil wars between generals continued one after the other. So basically, the concept is, hey, our general should be the emperor of the Roman Empire. And they declare imperator, and he becomes from a general to an emperor. But somewhere else, another part of the Roman Empire, those troops declare for their general in general and say he should be imperator. So you have this chaos of competing general emperors fighting each other constantly. Imperator. Okay, so what happens, as you can imagine, is that in the middle of this, of course, you got plagues, you got barbarians. Civil war is obviously not cheap. The imperial treasury could not finance all this. There's not enough booty that's gained from battle that could take the burden off the Roman people. And that responsibility, of course, weighed heaviest upon those who possessed a certain amount of wealth. Of course, now there was less wealthy people around to finance much of anything, right? so, uh, and these patrons were often bled dry. Public offices, once coveted to display their magnificence, were now, well, avoided. For to claim these positions only added to their overt affluent profile, announcing to the government and others wishing to having financial support that during these hard times that, hey, we're a potential mark to be fleeced, So people start keeping a low profile. Those few wealthy patrons who continued their involvement in civic life demanded some form of compensation, whether it be personal honors or benefits and security for the family members. I know that in Ephesus, the daughters of wealthy patrons were admitted into the priesthood of Artemis, while their sons gained various offices early on in their careers so they may advance faster into their respective positions and, of course, obviously help their careers in turn. So, but I want to tell you is that the term imperator starts becoming less meaningful. Remember, I told you that the Roman emperor had like three major powers, right? You have, of course, princeps. Well, we don't have that anymore, right? You have imperator and you have Pontifex Maximus, head of the Roman religion. What's going to happen is the imperator is losing its value, being head of the military because all the generals are using it. So what happens is that more and more Roman emperors are focusing on the power of Pontifex Maximus, head of the Roman religion. That becomes key. And you'll see this later on, especially with Diocletian, but even Constantine. So it's their religious role. But that means, in turn, that the imperial cult that's connected to that religion becomes even more important. And the fact that the Christians are not following that imperial cult becomes increasingly more detrimental for them and their life. Got it? So that's kind of what happens, right? So there is during the reign of Valerian, 253 to 260, most of the local civic coinage minted in various cities like Ephesus came to an end. Coins came to be minted primarily in imperial cities such as Rome and Constantinople. Unfortunately, the catastrophe that began towards the end of the second century and dominated much of the third century had a direct effect upon the Roman worldview. With the rise of superstition and suspicion against ideas that became popular or believed to cause their current woes, you had more and more motivation for action, for violence. But how do you get from a sophisticated and tolerant age to one that is simple minded and intolerant? The answer, of course, is the good old days of plenty must turn into the bad current days of lack, of hardship, of loss, of desperation, of war, of famine, of unmitigated and relentless destruction. That's what does it. Cities in Asia Minor, which is Turkey today, um, for example, went from thriving communities to desolate shadows of their former selves in just a few decades in the middle of the 3rd century CE. And while they revived somewhat, they were never again the same, never as prosperous or distinguished. Much of the latter public buildings, even in the 4th and 6th centuries, made from the ruins of earlier edifices. The uneducated are always a more gullible and superstitious lot. And while this age helped in the way of increase their numbers, what really helped sustain their theories of how the gods operate directly in meting out rewards and punishments were directly caused by these very trying times. Whenever times got bad in the past, for instance, the failure of a crop due to drought or insect infestation or some other agent of destruction. Um, um, and after they prayed, of course, to the gods to no avail, or they prayed to the gods, but they did not prevent this disaster. The natural reaction was that the god or that the goddess or the gods in general were angry about something, that someone or something had made them upset enough to spell out some of that kind of retribution. Of course, scapegoats were to be found and appeasement to be brought about as soon as possible. What does the superstitious and unlearned commoner do about not just a crop failing, but the failure of an entire era? What can he do but look for something even greater to blame? Sure, the barbarians were causing havoc, but even nature herself seemed to be angry. And so the cause becomes those who are not seen as being true to the gods of Rome, rejecting these mighty Olympians in favor of this exotic Jewish god that arose from a people always rebelling against the empire. This prejudicial viewpoint, now embraced by the commoner, soon rose to the imperial office itself. The gods were punishing them. They had to be. And ironically, the Romans were then naturally moving towards a historical worldview via the force of circumstances that was closely akin to those embraced by those who they're beginning to persecute. The Christians, as you know, saw their gods as working through history, giving out punishments and rewards. And while the Greek and Romans had traditionally believed this as well, amongst commoners, or I should say, amongst most except for the literati, this viewpoint was momentarily silenced, not quenched, but not as overt as centuries before. Those who are the intellectuals were thinking in a different way. But now, both pagan and Christians alike were looking up into the sky to the gods or God, or looking down below to the chthonic dark gods and spirits or Satan, and wondering just where the cause of their troubles were stemming from and how to stop it. Interesting, huh? The fall of the traditional classic city did not occur with its chief magistrates, city councils, local public religion, civic games, great banquets, and city treasuries able to finance monumental public buildings. Didn't happen with the Edict of Milan in 313 CE. It happened way earlier. It started during the reign of Marcus Aurelius. It recovered temporarily, but following the reign of Severus Alexander with Maximinus Thrax, it began to accelerate and with no sign of recovery. So you can already see right now the forces of this fall of the empire is kind of a combined thing, right? Now I got to give an example. So let's go ahead and go to the next image. So, as ways of an example, let's take a look at the city of Ephesus during the mid second into the third centuries, concerning the public cult of Artemis of the Ephesians. Um, so, in 166, 167, two Roman legions fighting in the Parthian campaign under the command of Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus, they returned back to Ephesus and brought the plague with them, devastating the local population. According to an inscription dated to 167 CE, discovered in the Britannium, the Ephesians sent a message to the oracle of Apollo at Claros for aid during this dire emergency. By the way, this is the oracle of Apollo at Claros. Yes, these are my photos. There's not a lot left of it, but let's go to the next image so you can kind of see what this place looks like. There's me. Apparently, this is my special column. I am the pillar of the community, right? Right there. So that's me again at Claros, wearing a traditional Turkish outfit. Not the shorts, of course, but the top there. Let's go to the next one. And you can see that a lot of it's underwater. Not many people visit here. It's in the middle of nowhere. And one more picture. And there's a series of waterworks that were actually there. It's almost like a labyrinth that is preserved to this day. I found it quite fascinating. Okay, so there you have it. Okay, you can put that down. That's great. Thank you. I thought you'd see what the oracle of Apollo looks like. Apollo instructed them that they were to take a golden image of his sister Artemis Ephesia to the Hermus Valley and worship her, praise her, and sing songs dedicated to her glory. So let's take a look at the image of Artemis of the Ephesians briefly. There we go. So this is Artemis of the Ephesians. And you can see the multiple protuberances, hanging fruit, bowls, testicles, breasts. Everybody argues about it. But this is the great Artemis of the Ephesians that, by the way, is mentioned in the book of Acts in the Bible, Acts 19, actually. And even in Acts, it mentions that she is worshipped all over the world. Artemis of the Ephesians is a mixture between various goddesses. She is, of course, in origins connected to the great Anatolian mother goddess and connected to Kububa or Kibali. And then she's also connected to the great mother Demeter as a Da Mater, right? Earth mother. And then a little bit later on, she gets other attributes. So the Greeks set along the coast. They bring in their own goddess Artemis, who is of the moon and the hunt. And what will happen is under King Croesus of Lydia, the two temples that were there, one dedicated to the great mother goddess, the great mother, and the other dedicated to the virgin goddess of the moon and hunt. It becomes one temple dedicated to the great virgin mother. This is the 500s BCE. So you can see where we're going to go with that one. But yes, and then it also, she is connected to Hecate. We know for a fact through inscriptions and connections with Alexandria, she is connected to Isis. So she is all these different goddesses. Many people say that she is one of the first goddesses after Isis to take on many different forms, but understood as the epitome or the embodiment of all those deities. So they're appealing to her. And of course, she is connected to the great temple of Artemis, which is one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, right? And but her brother in Claros is calling. Thank you for showing that, Margie. Thank you so much. So it gives us a little bit there. And so they're told that they are to praise her and sing songs dedicated to her glory. The hope was that the combined strength of Artemis and Apollo together might possibly save them from this terrible plague. Since, as it must have appeared, Artemis on her own, some were starting to think that maybe she's not as successful in stopping the loss of life that devastated, by the way, much of the rest of the Roman Empire. In fact, this plague was on scale as bad, if not worse, than the bubonic plague in the 14th century. Seriously, this is a really bad plague. This epidemic was actually an outbreak of two diseases, both smallpox and measles, and continued to break out at various times unchecked until 180 CE. The plague most likely took the life of the co-emperor Lucius Verus in 169, and it became so severe that Dio Cassius claimed it took as many as 2,000 lives a day in Rome at one point. 2,000. So the population of Rome is shriveling up. Can you imagine Ephesus? People are dying. People are desperate. This is a terrible time. One possible permanent ramification of the plague was that many Ephesians came to believe that maybe Artemis alone was not enough to help them during such trials. So they're calling for help to Apollo. In addition to Artemis, this inscription that I'm mentioning in the Britannium uh, says something else. In fact, let's take a look at, well, we'll pause for a second here. The inscription was actually a prayer uh, invoking the gods who are older than all, it says, demonstrating that there was an appeal to gods who were older and possibly viewed as maybe more powerful than Artemis herself and the other Olympians. Or it could be a reference to Zeus and Hestia, maybe. But we are not sure who these older gods are. But we are sure that people are desperate and they're looking for anything, any supernatural intervention during this period of time. Artemis, of course, as I said, appeared to be unable to, but they still declared her as a savior. There was another strategy. Let's take a look at the next image. So this is to the left. This is the great altar of Artemis in the Triotis area, the three-way area at Ephesus on the left. Let's go to the next image. So you see it's right next to the next. Is right next to the library of Celsus, and on the right-hand side is what's called the Mausius Mithridates Gate, which was connected to the goddess Hecate, as well as Artemis or Artemis Hecate. Let's look at the next image. So there's not much left of this altar. But what happened is as follows. She is declared as a savior, but one strategy they decided is expanding the altar of Artemis in the Triotis area into a monument dedicated to the Parthian War, demonstrating to all passing along this very busy intersection of the city that Artemis, as well as Selene, was responsible for this crucial military victory, despite the fact that there was a plague. They're saying, hey, you know what? It's not completely bad. Sure, there's a plague that's killing us, but hey, we were still victorious in battle, right? And so Artemis and maybe some other deities helped us out. So there you have it. I mean, that's the possibility. Let's take a look at the next image. So there's a library. I like this picture, Library of Celsus, and we're back to the Mausius Mithridates Gate. I just want to show you something here. The next image, and it's kind of hard to see, but there it is. There's the triple goddess right there, and we're also find there's inscriptions dedicated to Hecate on that very gate. So there really is a triple goddess in ancient times, and you're seeing that in stone, right? Okay, so good. I want to show you the next image. This is the Britannium. This is where they discovered the inscription. These are all my photos, of course. And the next image gets a nice little closer up of it. Yeah, wonderful. There. Okay, so we're going to be talking more about the Britannium in a little bit. But thank you, Margie. I'll just keep on going, keep on trucking through. So what happens is that next, during the reign of Commodus at Ephesus, the famous sophist and patron by the name of Titus Flavius Dominius paid for an elaborate portico to cover the Via Sacra, the sacred way, traveling from the city of Ephesus to the Artemisian, in hopes to encourage Ephesians and other visitors alike to continue their habit of visiting the temple of Artemis, even if it happened to be raining at that time, revealing a growing need to accommodate potential worshipers due to possible lack of interest. Yet because of the generous support of many committed patrons of Artemis Ephesia, her worship and mysteries, while not as elaborate as before, continued, and eventually some local enthusiasm did return for the celebrations of the cult during the reign of Commodus and into the reign of Septimius Severus. But the inscriptions of Ephesus reveal fewer and fewer potential patrons, with the general wealth of the city magistrates and those who held various public offices greatly reduced. It is definitely a problem. And so you're thinking, okay, well, what happens is another plague hits the Roman Empire. This plague lasted 2 decades, from 251 to 271. That's a long plague. We thought that COVID was bad. Oh, imagine 2 decades. The plague was so severe that in Rome it took as many as 5,000 in one day alone. Now, archaeological evidence for this plague has been discovered in many places throughout the empire, uh, even in, of course, in North Africa. The church historian Cyprian provides a gruesome look at this plague. He says, the bowels, relaxed in a constant flux, discharged the bodily strength, and a fire originated in the marrow ferments into wounds of the fauces, an area of the mouth. He wrote in Latin. He says the intestines are shaken with a continual vomiting, and the eyes are on fire with the injected blood. He added that in some cases, the feet or some parts of the limbs are taken off by the contagion of the disease through putrefaction. So this is a pretty terrible plague. You start to figure out why things are bad in Rome. People are getting sick, right? In fact, Cyprian believed the world was coming to the end. He says, the kingdom of God, beloved brethren, is beginning to be at hand. The reward of life and the rejoicing of eternal salvation and the perpetual gladness and possession lately lost to paradise are now coming with the passing away of the world. This devastating plague killed 2 Roman emperors, namely Justinian in 251 and Claudius II Gothicus in 270 CE. Archaeologists working at the funerary complex at Harwa and Akamiru in the west bank of the ancient city of Thebes discovered a body disposal site, which included kilns to produce the lime to cover the bodies, which is used to reduce the body as fast as possible, and the site of bonfires to incinerate the remains, with many portions of skeletons remaining. It was just there's so many dead bodies. They're trying to, pour lime to get rid of it all. It's a terrible time. Although the majority of the Roman Empire greatly suffered during the 3rd century, whether it be by plague or invasion or overtaxation, much of North Africa, except for Egypt, remained intact. Inscriptions reveal that much of the classic civic structure of the cities survived even into the 4th century in North Africa, complete with city councils still having much control. Monumental public buildings stopped only for 3 decades in the middle of the 3rd century and resumed again during Diocletian. By the end of the 4th century, public buildings were constructed as before. The lucrative African oil trade, along with the greatly expanded amphora trade, kept the North African provinces wealthy and somewhat insulated from events going on elsewhere about the empire. And then we get, of course, to the Emperor Diocletian. Let's take a look at old Diocletian right now. There we go. There he is. There's Diocletian. The Emperor Diocletian, who reigned from 284 to 305, may have single-handedly saved the Roman Empire from complete destruction. But his reforms were not necessarily preserving in the sense that the empire he left behind was, fundamentally transformed as a result. Probably the most common illustration of the reforms made by Diocletian is a system of the rule of 4 known as the tetrarchy. After the first 9 years of ruling the Roman Empire, Diocletian deemed the empire as much too expensive for any mortal to possibly hope to manage. With barbarian hordes now habitually crossing the Rhine River and crossing other traditionally impregnable border areas as well, Diocletian knew he needed strong leaders with enough authority to lead the troops to these various vulnerable positions. Yet he also needed leaders who had something to gain by fighting for him, or those in legitimate positions of authority. Since the emperor Severus Alexander was deposed by Maximinus Thrax in 235, the majority of emperors of Rome were generals who, after gaining enough localized power and cemented enough loyalty from their own troops, would suddenly be proclaimed emperor and march off to the barbarian battlefields and on to the battlefields against, well, whoever just happened to be currently viewed as the emperor of Rome at that any given moment. He pondered how to keep the balance and figured that a collective of legitimate leaders positioned in various places in the empire may provide just the right amount of checks and balances to provide some sense of stability. A sort of team of emperors and Caesars working together and every now and then helping the others in need. So let's go to the next image. So he first divided the Roman Empire into two halves. This is important for all of history. East and West, with a dividing line between the two cutting through Illyria, roughly what is currently Croatia. This division between the Greek East and the Latin West at this particular location would occur throughout the 4th century and become permanent after the Emperor Theodosius I divided the empire between his two sons in 395 CE. Of course, the cultural ramifications would include the division between Catholic and the Greek Orthodox Church, and of course, the divisions that still persist today between Western and Eastern Europe. Each side of the empire was to be ruled by an emperor. While one emperor would rule in the East, another emperor would rule in the West. Each of these emperors would have, in turn, a junior emperor, officially called a Caesar. Not a little Caesar, because that makes me hungry and I want pizza. The junior emperors or Caesars would receive direct overseership of more remote locations, often in the fringes, such as along the Rhine or in the Balkans near the Danube. To safeguard their positions, the emperors were the only ones with the enticing title of Augustus and still had the ultimate say in the event of a crisis. Diocletian also thought he figured the ideal of how to take care of the entire succession problem. He planned that when a senior emperor wished to retire or they died, the Caesar in their particular half of the empire would move into his position, thus becoming an emperor or an Augustus, while the new emperor would then in turn appoint a Caesar to fill their previous position. So you see right here in this image right here, so you have the senior emperor, Maximian. He's centered in Italy. The senior emperor, and of course his capital is no longer Rome. This is important. He moves it to Milan. Yeah, so even though the Roman Senate meets in Rome, the imperial capital becomes Milan. Meanwhile, Diocletian, he has his capital. You can see him, he's an Asia Minor, and he, of course, has control over Asia Minor and the Levant, as well as Egypt, which is the breadbasket. His capital is at Nicomedia. Nicomedia is very near to later on Constantinople. So it is near the coast there, near the straits. The junior emperor is Galerius. He's a Caesar, and his capital is Sirmium, and he changes it about a few times. And of course, Constantius, who, by the way, is the father of Constantine the Great, his capital is in Trier, Germany, and he has much of course, what is now Gaul or France, England, and what is now Belgium. So that is the tetrarchy. So that's how they kind of put their positions. Now, the tetrarchy was organized and ready to go by 292 CE. Diocletian decided to take the richer, more secure Eastern Empire for himself. Well, it gave Maximian the Western Empire, already revealing obvious signs of decline. Both men decided, as I said, to create their respective own capitals. We talked about that. The next year, 293, that's where they decided to have these junior emperors. So now what happens now is that the next thing, let's look at me for a few seconds. So the next thing is that we need to up the imperial cult. We know that we know that imperator doesn't mean as much anymore, right? Being declared imperator is every Tom, Dick, and Harry who's a general is being declared imperator. I'm an emperor. It's not as unique. It's not as valued. But head of the Roman religion, that is so. Diocletian takes on the airs of a Oriental despot, and what he does is that he asks for people to do proskynesis before him, to bow all the way down before him, and maybe they can look up and touch the fringe of his imperial robe. His throne would rise up at times, with plumes of incense and, of course, feathers. And there's all these trappings that he, in a sense, is a god. In fact, he had ordered that he is to be called Deus. He is to be called Lord as well as God. He is semi-divine. Wow. Well, you can see how this is going to play with Christians. So what happens is he's semi-divine. And Christians don't want to look at Diocletian as a god. Remember before the Roman emperors were the sons of a son of God, not a god. But now it seems that Diocletian's moving into this god position, God on earth. But he realizes it's important. He realizes it's important because he needs to hold the empire together. But here it is. Early Christian writings talk about this. This is why I find it so fascinating. Early Christian writings, of all things, they're not sympathetic to Maximinus Thrax, who just killed the Roman leaders. By the way, there's another Roman emperor in the 250s known as Decius. And Decius, what he did is he didn't order just the destruction or the killing of the leaders of the church. He ordered that all Christians are to die. And so he actually created what's called the libelli system. And the libelli system basically is you have to have papers on you to demonstrate that you worship the gods. And the libelli, which have been discovered all over the sands of Egypt, these are on display if you want to see them for yourself. It included your name, where you live, any characteristics of you, and it also included, did you do the sacrifice? What did you sacrifice? And so, and this paper was an issue of sacrifice, proof of it. And so the idea is that you had this on you. Now, if you are a Christian, you couldn't sacrifice to the gods, you couldn't receive the libelli, and as a response, you would be arrested and systematically, in some cases, will be killed. Many Christians didn't want to sacrifice to the gods, but they didn't want to die either. And so there's a big controversy where many of the Christians who are wealthy, they paid their slaves to act like them to get the papers. So they technically didn't do it. But this caused a big problem later on when the church said, well, maybe we shouldn't readmit you at all into the church. So anyway, but now Diocletian is doing the same thing. Diocletian is Lord and God, and does he not expect the Christians to react? Well, he actually doesn't want them to. So even though early Christians, as I mentioned before, are hard on Maximinus Thrax and they're hard on Decius, they're a little bit easier on Diocletian because he really doesn't want to do this. He just sees that as a strategic way, as a fundamental way, a strategy of keeping the empire together when you lost the other two supports for his imperial power. So he's hoping nothing will happen. Well, what happens, unfortunately, is he's about to go to battle against the Sasanians, and they're in Antioch, actually a little city south of Antioch, and they're before the temple there, and the augurs are reading the entrails, and the Christians in his staff, whenever they are opening up the haruspices, whenever they are reading the entrails, they crossing themselves in order to protect themselves, quickly cross themselves. And Diocletian's probably hoping nobody notices that. Unfortunately, the augur, the high priest, notices. He says, "Hey, I can't read these. I can't read these entrails. I can't read anything because it's being ruined by these Christians who are crossing themselves." Oh no! So what happens? You can see where this mess is going to be. And then there's another instance where the junior emperor by the name of Galerius, what a name, His mom is having a great feast, sacrificing to the Great Mother, and everybody's sitting down except for her Christian staff, who are standing outside of their chairs, refusing to dine at the site. And so she's incensed. So she tells her son Galerius, Galerius, you got to get Diocletian. You got to get him to do his job. These people are not being patriotic. They're not seeing Diocletian of who he is. Now, Diocletian is in the hard part. He doesn't want to do it. He actually does not want to do the persecution, but he also realizes that he's in trouble. So the Senate of Rome says, okay, you got to do it. And Diocletian says, okay, tell you what, we'll see what the Oracle of Delphi says. Actually, the Senate says that too. Go to the Oracle of Delphi. Ask those at Delphi, not the Oracle of Delphi, sorry, to the Oracle of Didyma. I apologize. The Oracle of Apollo at Didyma, which is, I've been there. It's huge. It's a huge remains of a temple. It was 3 times larger than the Parthenon in Athens. It's a beautiful place. But this Oracle of Apollo at Didyma had some problems. The tourist trade was going down. Less people are visiting. They're wanting more notoriety. And you see what's going to happen. And so the question is asked of the ecstatic lady that was there, putting her feet in the water, asking the question, what should Diocletian do? In the situation, since these Christians are not revering him the way they should, and he's not declared as a god, they're not participating in the imperial cult, they're not patriotic. The oracle says that they should be eliminated. They'd be forced to worship the gods or be eliminated. And so starts one of the greatest persecutions of the church during this period of time. We're talking streets running with blood. It's a massacre. There was a church in Nicomedia across the way from the palace. It was a church building, because already Christians are moving from house churches to actual structures right across the way, and across from the imperial palace of Nicomedia, and they're burning it down. And Galerius is watching. They had terrible tortures. One torture that Galerius and others would systematically do is they would peel people's skin off and put salt on it. Just terrible, horrible persecutions. This is what's going on. And Diocletian does not want to do it, but it's a choice between him being emperor and doing this, or him not being emperor. Now, something happens though. This is where it gets fascinating, is that his section of the Roman Empire, he is doing these persecutions. As you saw, it's in Asia Minor going into the Levant, into Egypt. As you can imagine, a large portion of the population are now Christian. Now that they're being persecuted, are they buying anything? No, no buying, no selling. Are they part of the military? No. So what's happening is that part of the empire is becoming weak militarily and economically. That's what happens when now there seems to be up to 1/4 of the population, 1/5 to 1/4 of the population now Christian. If you are systematically killing them or persecuting them, they're not going to go out to the marketplace. They're not going to be part of contributing to the economy. Is this making sense? So not good. There's another area under Galerius. Galerius is doing this. He's, of course, in Greece and in the Balkans. He's doing this, and the same kind of thing is happening. And they're losing wars along the Danube. This is terrible. Well, again, you're killing potential troops and other people who are buying and selling and so forth. The same thing with Maximian's section 2. Same thing in Italy. However, this is important for you to know. Constantius, who is a worshiper of the sun god, Sol Invictus, like his son will be Constantine, he does a little bit of things. He orders some of the Bibles to be handed over. By the way, the word hand over, traditores, is the root for traitor. So those who hand over the holy books. But then he stops. And you know what happens? His part of the empire thrives economically, and they win the wars. Now, you know, the Romans are big on signs, right? So three parts not doing very well, one part doing well. What part's doing well? Duh, the part where they're not persecuting a portion of the population. So you can see that this persecution will start falling apart because even the Romans themselves see this as some kind of sign that maybe the gods are not for this at all, and this is not what they're thinking, and that maybe the Oracle of Didyma were a little bit more deceptive. You know, they're wanting to build the tourist trade up. You know, people are not going there enough. Is this helpful? So this is kind of the bigger picture, right? That's going on. So, as a result of that, Diocletian ends the persecution of Christians. He does stop it. It does end. But you can see at this point, Christianity is significant enough in numbers to be needed to be accommodated, right? And you can see that will happen with the next emperor, Constantine the Great. Let's go to the next image. So, on what happens also is that Diocletian, he also, to help the Roman Empire, he actually doubles the number of Roman provinces from 50 to around 100 in total. Each of these smaller provinces were then subdivided into 12 dioceses, each, and were then under the authority of a vicarius, who was a deputy of the Praetorian prefects. Both the vicari and governors became responsible for justice and taxation, while the duty for local military command fell to a new official called a duce or a duke, who each often oversaw between 2 to 3 of these provinces. Now, guess what? The church followed roughly the pattern of their diocese system in conformity with Diocletian's diocese, with each diocese placed under control of a bishop, and in the same way, each vicarius in charge of their administrative diocese. So what I find is really fascinating here is that this is actually also the beginning of the diocese system in the Catholic Church. On a local level, the tetrarchy retransformed what was left of civic life, unfortunately, placing much pressure upon the decurions, who were members of the local city senate, and they were charged with these officials were charged with collecting taxes and other administrative duties. The decurions were typically chosen from what's called the curule class. These were landowners, these were merchants, these were other businessmen. So roughly, I would say the wealthier upper middle class. And so what happens is, according to Wolfgang Leibschutz, he notes that the Diocletian reforms, setting up a more elaborate central administration, smaller provinces, and a highly bureaucratic system of taxation, with taxes raised and partly spent in kind, made much heavier demands of decurions. Henceforth, they would not only be obliged to collect the taxes, but they would also have to spend a great deal of time administrating the distribution of levies, the transport and storage of products of taxation, paying out of salaries, and keeping of accounts. If things went wrong, decurions were liable to corporal punishment or to making up a deficit out of their own property, unquote. Oh, so what does this do? The ideal of a city self-government was then replaced by a civic subordination to the emerging imperial hierarchy, with administrators taking the place of counselors. What local council remained was largely oligarchical in nature. Of course, decurions had to remain, but for who else could collect the much in demand taxes on the local level? Yet the draw of this office obviously lost all its allure, and many tried to avoid serving in this capacity as much as possible. The creation of smaller sized provinces created a heavier localized burden upon the local patrons of the cities. thereby reducing their ability to maintain the traditional public buildings and games and festivities, and often depleting the resources altogether. Yet this same reform had the opposite effect upon the cities chosen to be the capital of the provinces, for now all the wealth became concentrated in these centers where the local governor had his court. This was especially true in the Greek East. Here, cities like Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, Ephesus, Nicomedia, and Constantinople would experience a revival beginning in the late 3rd century and will be thriving again by the 4th century. So it's really a major, major change. Because of the constant attacks of the barbarians from the north and northeast, and the attacks of the revived Parthian or Persian Empire under the domain of the Sassanid kings from the east, many towns and cities had to allocate funds for building city walls for their protection. Oh no. So now they're building walls. This added expense drained their already local treasuries to cut costs. The walls sometimes enclosed smaller portions of their cities and towns. Sometimes even the higher ground where citadels were often constructed. This way, in case of a potential danger, the outlying population could still have a refuge. Furthermore, to save on materials, many public buildings, such as baths, were demolished to provide stones for these fortresses. So you can see everything is changing, right? I guess you could see me for a little bit here. So you can see how important this is, right? During the reign of the Emperor Aurelian, Rome received a fine new set of city walls constructed between 271 to 275 CE. Rome again was deemed vulnerable to potential barbarian attack, a fear that had not been present since the Gauls attacked Rome in 390 BCE. Fortunately, Rome was not sacked in the 3rd century, a fate reserved for the 5th century, when the city was first sacked by the Visigoths in 410, and then the Vandals in 455. To save on expenses, Aurelian incorporated many buildings along the line of the walls, of course, So the combination of heavy taxation, overburdened magistrates, and pressures to construct walls, many local urban centers lost the ability and incentives to better themselves, now reduced to simply survival. As for any rewards for public service, as opposed to any benefits arriving from local cities, the new sources for rewards and prestige arrived by way of imperial service, either directly to the emperor or a connection to one of the imperial governors. There was also, let's quickly go to this image, there's also an issue of the Edict of Maximum Prices. So here we go. This is the edict right here. There's quite a few. They're spread all over the Roman Empire that were not only proclaimed, but they're carved in stone in all the major cities for everyone to see, and was in both Greek and Latin. Diocletian hoped by freezing prices on the most popular commodities that they would be affordable and so help save the economy. But traders view these prices as too low, providing only a marginal profit, and so they simply ignore the price limits or moved to the bartering system. The edict also set limits on wages, fixing how much a person should be paid. This plan also backfired, for they were considered too low. The debased coinage was also considered worthless. All in all, Diocletian's economic policies were a complete failure. A complete failure. So we move to the next image. Yeah, we have. There's Constantine and me. Now, what happens is, unfortunately, the tetrarchy itself, as a form of political succession, also began to fall apart after Diocletian and Maximian retired. And so Constantine, the son of Constantius, was saluted as emperor by by the troops in York, and then he found himself at war with Maxentius, which is Maximian's son, over the city of Rome, and which was the key to gaining Italy at that time. This is one of the turning points of history, known as the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312 CE. Concerning the event just prior to his battle for Rome, leading up to his defeat of Maxentius at the Milvian Bridge, you have, of course, Constantine was advised in a dream to mark the heavenly sign of God on the shields of his soldiers and then engage in battle. He did as he was commanded by means of a slanted letter X or chi with the top bent around. He marked Christ on their shields, according to Lactantius. Many argue that Constantine was instructed to place the Greek letter chi and rho upon their shields, the first two letters of the name Christ in Greek. The story is definitely early, and it does originate from someone who knew Constantine quite well. In fact, Lactantius was not only a famous rhetorician, but also his oldest son's tutor. The second story originates from Eusebius, and it was written in 337, just 1 year prior to Constantine's death. It says about the time of the midday sun, when the day was just turning, he said that he saw with his own eyes up in the sky and resting over the sun a cross-shaped trophy formed from light and a text attached to it that said, "By this sign conquer." Amazement at the spectacle both seized him and the whole company of soldiers who was then accompanying him on campaign and witnessed the miracle, unquote. Of course, in Latin, by this sign, hoc vicus, it means that as a result of his mystical vision, Constantine believed the sign could be used as protection against the attacks of the enemy, since what came from God's assistance is irresistible and invincible. Yet, by the way, this historical validity of this account is still not agreed upon, for as often reasoned why Lactantius why did he mention this? Because also there's another work, the Panegyric Latini, which presents a similar story taking place in Gaul, modern France, 2 years prior to the Battle of Milvian Bridge in 310. And while this pagan source also refers to a great solar vision complete with a radiating halo effect, the center of the vision that Constantine saw was, well, Apollo, not the cross of Christ. But there you have it. So you can we'll go to my face now. But the Eusebian story is still of major importance, whatever the verdict, for it justly represents Constantine's predominant belief that earthly power for any ruler is only secured if a deity, in this case the Christian God, permits it. The sign and visions, whether valid or fabricated, served a rhetorical purpose, a proof text, so to speak, legitimizing his imperial power as sanctioned by God. Once more, this was the prevalent view of many emperors before him. The only difference in this case was that Constantine owed his terrestrial power to this Christian deity rather than the gods of the traditional Roman pantheon. And furthermore, as mentioned, Constantine remained Pontifex Maximus, the imperial designated head of the Roman religion. By default, the gods of the Christians became official in a state sense through him because he was the head of the Roman religion. Naturally, this also meant that with Constantine's later conversion, Christians gained a chief executive with official power to elevate their status over those who are devoted eventually to the traditional gods of Rome. But this doesn't happen quite yet. At this point, it's both as equal. So this means that Constantine is the head of the Roman religion that's inclusive of the pagan imperial religion and the Christian religion. That's all that happens. The other thing I want you to bring notice to is the fact that, hey, it's the Christian God that now gives victory in battle, right? And using this magical talisman, this sign, this image, we have defeated the enemy. So this is very magical. This is very pagan. This is not necessarily much of a Christian worldview. This is business as usual, right? This is the way things always were. Interesting, right? Now, almost. By the way, there's an arch that of Constantine that's outside the by the Colosseum that was erected by the Senate in dedication to this event. I just want to mention that on this arch itself, it nowhere gives credit to a Christian God, and everywhere gives credit to the fact that whatever deity is in heaven, it keeps it nebulous, it keeps it open. At the same time, it cements Constantine the Great as Pontifex Maximus. So once again, the old three-pronged power of the Roman Emperor, now reduced to one, is being carried on by Constantine the Great. Almost immediately after defeating Maxentius, Constantine went to meet the then co-emperor Licinius. They're still co-emperor at this time, in 313. One of the main topics brought up in Milan concerned religious toleration, especially in relation to the Christians. The result was what was referred to as the Edict of Milan, which, by the way, is understood as the imperial capital. Remember, Rome is no longer the imperial capital. It's Milan. That's the imperial capital. Now, of course, the Edict of Milan circulated amongst the eastern provinces, not as much in the west, but it still was important. While it is true the decision of Milan resulted in the state decision to protect Christians, just to protect them, the general conclusion was the freedom of worship was granted to all, Christians and non-Christians alike. As for the references to the deity, in direct contrast to the previous reign of Diocletian, who is famous for his persecution against the Christians, whereby the names Jupiter and Hercules were often invoked, general terms were now applied in this document. They were now meant to appease, this edict is meant to appease whatever deity there is in the seat of heaven. Quicquid est divinitatis in sed celesti. Got it? Following Milan, of course, the clergy gained the right to full immunity, inclusive of freedom from compulsory service in the military and other public offices and taxation. But that was the same for the pagan clergy anyway. Now, here's the problem. Okay, so now he is Pontifex Maximus. This is a very big moment, and I want to bring this up and I want to emphasize it because it really does go into detail of the change or the transformations between church and state. So, yes, Constantine is head. He is Pontifex Maximus. He's head of the Roman religion that's now inclusive of protecting Christians as well as Jews, by the way. So I mentioned that. It's mentioned also in the edict. But Christians don't have to acknowledge that fact. So now what happens is the Council of Arles in 314. What happens is this. The Christian community in North Africa is struggling over how to treat those baptized by the clergy who handed over the holy books and images to Roman authorities during the recent persecutions. Many agree the clergy who violated the church in this way were traitors, from the Latin traditores, meaning people who hand over things. Many also worried their sin also tainted anyone they officially touched in office, for instance, in baptism and ordination. The community appealed to the bishops. The bishops appealed to the Bishop of Rome. The Bishop of Rome didn't know what to do. So they appealed to Constantine as the arbitrator, who in turn handed the decision over back to the Bishop of Rome. You've got to decide this, not me. Well, what happens is the Bishop of Rome says, no, you do it. And gives Constantine the right to call a church council. This is not something that Constantine asked for. It's something that the church gave up. And so Constantine then calls the Council of Arles. Now, what should have happened is nobody should have showed up for it because this is a Roman emperor calling a council. What happens? The dummies all show up. Okay, I guess I'm deciding now. And so the bishop shows up. So Constantine decided that those who were touched by the traitorous clergy were not tainted in any way. Order at all costs happened to be the goal. And so this set a precedent for another outrageous situation. And that is, of course, the Council of Nicaea. It should have been an in-church matter, but now you have the Council of Arles established as a precedent Of course, now Constantine thinks that I guess I'm the one who calls the councils. I'm the Pontifex Maximus, head of the Roman religion, which is inclusive of Christianity. I guess this is one of my jobs because the Pope was supposed to do that. It wasn't Sylvester's the one before it. So what happens is there's another controversy going on, and that's called Arianism. Arius, Arius, not having to do with the Aryan race. Arius is the person, Arius of Alexandria. He comes up with this idea, and briefly, this idea known as Arianism goes as follows. Because there was a time when the Son was not, because the Son has a Father, uh, therefore, the Son is less than the Father, and therefore the Son is a creature of the Creator and less than and so this emphasizes, of course, the power of the Father, and so subordinates, is subordinated. The Son is subordinated underneath it. So they would say there's a time when the Son was not, heoteuke, as they say in Greek. So what happens is as follows: Arius, he's charismatic. He spreads this information all over the place. It's causing, this is another talk, to worry about that later. You can listen to my Constantine talk on this, and it spreads throughout the Roman world through popular beliefs. And Constantine's going, oh, great. And so he issues an edict that just says, don't talk about it, everybody. Everybody talks about it. You don't do that. Everybody's talking about this idea that Jesus is subordinate to the Father, and he's less, and he's like an angel in some cases, and so what happens is he calls a council, the Council of Nicaea, at his own palace, in which is in Iznik today, which partly is underwater. And I've been there. Part of the council chamber is underwater. I can swim it. It's kind of fun. Woo, yay. So the decision's made that Arianism is bad. In 325, and the Nicene Creed is called in. And, he doesn't make all the decisions, but he's still there. He's presiding. He gets that power. The next thing that he does, right? So now what's happened is church and state is coming even closer together. Okay. And we're talking about the fall of the empire. We sure are. We're going into the nuts and bolts. You're learning everything. Now, Constantine, what happens is decides to find another place for a capital too. He found the city of Rome too adrift in local power and politics and bitter rivalry and strategically problematic. He didn't like Milan either. He thought a new capital needed to be closer to the Danube and the Euphrates rivers, which are basically two areas that need to have constant, vigilant attention. So he decided to move the imperial court elsewhere and eventually decided upon a city known as Byzantium, commanding the passage of the Dardanelles between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, and commanding the small land area between Europe and Asia. Taking 6 years to build, his new capital was completed on May 11th, 330 CE, and the name Constantinople was decided. The city would eventually become the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, also known as the Byzantine Empire, and would remain its capital until 1453. Now, we had Constantine the Great, a new avenue opened up for service that was secure, and that was via the church. A wealthy patron now did not feel he had to be part of the city council or any local governing power, or even seek imperial patronage, for the church now offered opportunities for advancement. While in the past, one of the most esteemed local positions was chief magistrate or high priest of the local civic cult, now the position of bishop offered the same kind of opportunities. But unlike the civic offices, the bishopric and other ecclesiastical offices were not, I repeat, were not taxed. Yet in representing the church, bishops were required to uphold their ethical standards, that are consistent with Christianity, and often running counter to the ideals of public displays. For often these kinds of activities represented the pride and vanity of life from their perspective. As you can imagine, this new Christian ethic ran directly counter to the civic pride and the pagan past. So what could or should a potential Christian patron invest his resources into? Where should we invest things in, if not public displays, if not the games, if not the theater? Where should we put our money? The obvious answer, build a church, or later on, build a monastery. Yet this kind of attitude was more evident in the Latin West than the Greek East of the Roman Empire for cultural reasons that we will discuss later on. Economically, the Roman Empire under Constantine revived a little bit. Let's take a look at some images here. So right here. So while he retained the same provincial organization into multiple provinces with the respective dioceses, he abandoned Diocletian's debased silver coins, ending them in 310. Constantine decided to focus the economy on gold rather than silver, issuing in 312 the gold coin known as the solidus, with 72 of them equaling a pound of gold. Romans had confidence in the gold solidus, and this did indeed help the economy. In fact, the solidus retained its amount in gold all the way until the 10th century, when the Eastern Roman Emperor Nicephorus Phocas created the lightweight gold coin. So there you have it. Next image. Of course, Constantine established Constantinople as the premier capital of the Greek East, contributed to the further division between the Greek East and the Latin West of the Roman Empire. While it is true that previous Roman emperors found their own imperial capitals outside that of Rome, most notably Diocletian with Nicomedia, also located in the Greek East, Constantine went out of his way to make Constantinople as glorious as Rome itself, giving this establishment on the strategic Bosphorus, which was positioned upon the boundary between Europe and Asia, as well as the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, a lasting presence. The city was perfect for trade and as a secure base for military deployment. Following the foundations of the city, the emperor in the Greek East no longer desired to establish other capitals, which was not in the case of the Latin West. Rome was already losing its value. Rome, that's right, Rome is losing its value. And while it was still the city that housed a rather ineffective Roman Senate, Roman emperors preferred to have their imperial capitals in places like Trier and Milan, and of course, eventually Ravenna. While Constantine was emperor, the Roman Empire was still unified despite having two capitals in Rome and Constantinople. But when Constantine died in 337, he divided the Roman Empire amongst his sons, Constantius, Constans, and Constantine II, the latter dying soon after, and so effectively splitting the empire back into two, with Constans receiving the West Latin part and Constantius the Greek part in the East. It is very clear from the primary sources at that time that the two sides operated independently of one another, often in conflict, with the two sons threatening war with one another. With the death of Constans in 350, the Roman Empire was united again under his brother Constantius, which lasted until his death in 361. You can end this picture, but that's a great one. So Constantius I told you, Arianism, of course, was defeated supposedly at the Council of Nicaea. Well, it turned out even during Constantine's reign 3 years later, it revives. Arius is even brought back to Constantinople. Ooh, who knew? So, but then he dies in this horrible, terrible accident in the lavatory. But Arianism comes back, and Constantine's son, Constantius, embraces Arianism as the official belief system of the Roman Empire. Yes, they have church councils. In fact, officially, what happens under the reign of Constantius is that Nicaea is debunked, it's overthrown, it's no longer the case. And then what Constantius does is, now that he has the alliance between himself and the church, and he is, of course, Arian, what he does is he systematically persecutes the Nicene Christians. Anybody who's a Christian that supports the Nicene Creed, now they are being wiped out. Now they're being killed. It's mayhem going on. Terrible stuff. So we went from, before Constantine the Great, you have pagans persecuting Christians. Now you have Christians persecuting Christians, Arian Christians persecuting Nicene Christians, going back and forth, and yeah, streets are running with blood and yada yada. A terrible time. But this is important for us to remember. It is, because it's during this time when Arianism is the official religion of the Roman Empire that missionaries from Rome go out to the barbarians and convert them over to Christianity. And what kind of Christianity did they convert them over to? Not Catholic Christianity, but Arian Christianity. So during this period of time, that means that, yeah, the Visigoths are going to become Arian. The Ostrogoths, they're going to become Arian. At first, the Franks are Arian, but they switch over to Catholicism. That's all another story. The Vandals, they're going to become Arian. All the barbarians, Germanic barbarians, are Arian. So you can understand that when the barbarians attack, they see that the local Latin population happens to be Catholic. So they already have a difference of belief system. So that means that there's persecution now of the barbarian Christians against the Roman Christians. Whew. Okay, so what happens after that? Okay, so what happens after that is we get a breather, and I get a breather, and that is Julian, who is a pagan. From 361 to 363, he attempts to bring paganism back, but he gets killed in battle and died fighting the Persians. His successor, Jovian, only lasted a year, with the Roman Empire divided again with the next two in power. Valentinian I in charge of the Latin West in 364 to 375, and his brother Valens in charge of the Greek East from 364 to 378. Valentinian is often considered as the last of the great Western Roman emperors, as he was successful in building the frontiers of Germania. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on, but eventually Valens gets himself killed, Adrianople, in 378. But moving right along, the emperor after Valens, of course, is Theodosius I. And now we have another big change. So here we go. So let's go to this image. Under Emperor Theodosius, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. And he made paganism illegal and drastically changed the religious as well as the political climate of the Roman Empire that would have a lasting legacy. Theodosius didn't just decide one day to make these changes, but a certain bishop of Milan by the name of Ambrose forced him to do this against his will. Let's take a look at the next image. There is Ambrose. Yeah, that really is Ambrose at the Church of St. Ambroglia. And I got to see him. He's kind of a skeleton, but that really is him. Okay, so the story of how Ambrose managed to humble the Roman Emperor Theodosius actually begins in an obscure tavern somewhere in the city of Thessalonica in the year 390. So you can take the actually look at the next picture. I just want you to see this is the church. This is my picture of the church that it was contained in. Okay, so let's tell the story. Okay. So the story goes as follows. Thank you for the image. The story goes as follows. So there's this obscure tavern. This is the moment. These are weird moments in history that change everything. It makes you kind of wonder about the butterfly effect. Here we goes. So the story is, accordingly, that this obscure tavern in Thessalonica, that according to Sozomen, the historian, that there was a certain popular charioteer that was bantering about and laughter. He was probably inebriated. And so what happened is then, quote, saw himself shamefully exposed and attempted an outrage. We can understand that basically he's in this tavern and he shows himself. The charioteer shows his naked truth. And the account continues. And so he was apprehended and put into custody. Well, whatever the sordid details, His subsequent imprisonment effectively put a damper on the general mood of a very sports-minded populace, for which the thrilling races at the local hippodrome had become their civic obsession, much like soccer games, right? For Europe today. In fact, disappointment eventually transformed into rage as the Thessalonians convinced themselves that this one charioteer was so fundamental for their celebrations that they simply could not go on. In their opinion, he had to be released, and he had to be released immediately. Suddenly, the people took to the streets, stoning local magistrates and attacking other public officials. After the ensuing riot, Buthyricus, general of the troops in Illyria, was found dead. Outraged by their public crime, Theodosius interpreted this riot as a personal attack against his own authority and proceeded to order the death of thousands without the benefit of a trial. As another Christian historian by the name of Theodoret notes, multitudes were mowed down like ears of corn in harvest tide, unquote. It is estimated that as many as 7,000 perished as a result of this incident. Sozomen adds that even strangers who had but just arrived there in their journey to other lands were sacrificed with the others. Believing justice was served, since he believed he was merely acting in the manner of the expectations of a Roman head of state, especially when sedition is detected. Theodosius confidently marched into Milan and prepared to pray in the church, as was customary. But when he approached the gates of the church edifice, he was suddenly met by Ambrose, who grabbed his purple robes and declared to him and all those present, "Stand back! A man defiled by sin and with his hands imbued in blood unjustly shed is not worthy without repentance to enter within these sacred precincts or partake of the holy mysteries." Yet Ambrose did not stop there, but ventured into more controversial territory, broaching the question of ultimate authority. Peradventure, your imperial power prevents you from recognizing the sin and power stands in light of reason. We must, however, know how our nature passes away and is subject to death. We must know the ancestral dust form that we sprang and to which we are swiftly returning. We must not be bedazzled by the sheen of purple and fail to see the weakness of the body that it robes. You are a sovereign, sir, a man of like nature of your own, and who are in truth your fellow slaves. For there is one Lord and sovereign of mankind, creator of the universe. With what eyes, then, will you look on the temple of our common Lord? And with what feet you will tread that holy threshold? How will you stretch forth your hands still dripping with the blood of unjust slaughter? How in such hands will you receive the holy body of God? How will you, with your own lips, rage so unrighteously poured forth with so much blood, lift your lips to precious blood, be gone? So what happens is you got this whole big strike against him. The emperor was dumbfounded. He paused to consider this bold declaration. But as Theodoret notes, Theodosius knew clearly what belonged to priests and what to emperor. Theodosius, unlike other Christian Roman emperors before him, was already baptized by the church. I'll tell you what's going on. Usually, a Roman emperor like Constantine waited. They waited upon their death to be baptized, and Theodosius actually believed the same thing. In fact, what happened is Theodosius got really sick, and Theodosius thought he's going to die. So he had himself baptized, and then all of a sudden, he was better. But now there's a problem. He's a baptized Christian, and he is Pontifex Maximus. This is important. I know it seems like trivia. It's important. So the problem is that at that point, since baptism was considered an official entrance into the church by that time, He was viewed as a member of the church and by default under its moral authority as a Christian, regardless whether he was Roman emperor or not. Now, Ambrose, standing between him and the church building, was also, through his bold rebuke, positioning himself as the representative of God, believed by both he and the emperor as the indisputable sovereign. As God's agent on earth, in cases regarding ecclesiastical affairs, Ambrose made it clear that he was the one in authority, not the emperor. Seeing he could not deny the accusation, Theodosius bowed in submission before the bishop's superior moral authority and returned to his palace weeping bitterly. 8 months later, Ambrose still refused to forgive the emperor, and Theodosius was faced with the reality that not only was he going to miss the grand Christmas festival because of his error, a big deal for a sovereign who is considered son of the church, but worse still, he even began to fear that just as the doors of the church were shut before him, so were the gates of heaven. He was broken by Ambrose. Broken. Theodosius came to the bishop and fully underwent penance for his acts, humbly putting his purple robes aside and doing whatever was asked of him, for now he confessed his crimes against God. There it is. This is a big moment in world history. Theodosius' act of submission before Ambrose was the quintessential turning point in his reign, and this resulted in the extension of the church's influence in the decisions of the state as well. One of the issues that now arose concerned the government support of paganism. Immediately now, funds from the Roman public treasury ceased to go to the maintenance of pagan altars because it was argued that how can a Pontifex Maximus, who is head of the Roman religion, be a Christian who is also over a pagan religion at the same time, right? So what happens is, but the changes did not stop there, for new questions began to circulate regarding the extent of imperial jurisdiction in respect to religious issues, with Ambrose fanning the flames as best as he could. The thought occurred to Theodosius that if he, as an emperor, was indeed both head of the Roman state and a devoted Christian under the moral authority of the church, how could he, through his authority, support a belief system that was not his own? Ambrose was ready with answers and had already set a precedent with what's called the altar of victory. Let's look at the next image. There it is. To 383. This is a coin that we have of the image. Since the reign of Augustus, the altar of victory, with its overtly depicted winged golden goddess, stood prominently in the Roman Senate in Rome. This altar was established in commemoration of the defeat of Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium, and showed the goddess holding a palm branch and a laurel wreath. Ambrose managed to convince the Emperor Gratian, directly before his assassination, that it was necessary to remove the pagan altar because of its apparent conflict against his own Christian faith. The pagan-dominated Senate obviously did not concur with Gratian's decision and sent an embassy to the new Emperor Valentinian II, led by the famous orator and urban prefect Quintus Aurelius Symmachus. With his arguments seemed logical enough to many, asserting that the restoration of the altar of victory was simply a demonstration of religious tolerance. His words, however, fell upon a very impressionable and young emperor, already convinced that Ambrose was right, and so the embassy failed. But the question of the altar of victory was not over yet. Again, in 391, Theodosius was asked to reestablish the altar, and at Ambrose's insistence, refused to do so. Ambrose knew he had succeeded in finding a Christian emperor in the person of Theodosius, willing enough to take the next step in recognizing the church's moral authority as applying in totality to the imperial decision-making. So look at me for a few seconds. So as a result, Theodosius in 391 declared the official end of all public observances of paganism, an edict admittedly enforced more in the Greek East half of the Roman Empire than in Rome and the Latin West. The next year, Theodosius proceeded further, going as far as forbidding all private observances of paganism as well. All these prohibitions were established within the Theodosian Code. Hence, the prescriptions against paganism became a matter of law, not just conscience. With the edicts of Theodosius, the empire now became a de facto Christian state, with the last vestiges of paganism swept aside by acts stemming from official imperial action. But the fact that one religion gains official state endorsement over another, that one belief system replaces an older one in the public forum, is nothing revolutionary. What is important to remember in this case, however, is the degree to which one religious official was able to gain enough influence to dictate matters of state by appealing to a higher authority without leaving his officially sanctioned position. Ambrose was not even the Bishop of Rome, but of Milan, and yet through the sheer force of his convictions, he held a supreme position within the force, within the church for the entire half of the second part of the 4th century, creating an understanding of church-state issues that would define the medieval church. Truly, Ambrose not only brought an emperor literally to his knees, he, through the force of his personality, brought an empire to his knees as well. Let's look at the next image. So this is the famous Serapeum, one of the largest temples of the ancient Roman world in Alexandria, Egypt. Theodosius, of course, ordered this temple. Actually, he didn't order it destroyed. It was closed down, but the local bishop ordered it destroyed. This is all that's left of it today. Look at the next image. There it is today. Not much left. It's completely destroyed. Yeah. So so thank you for showing that image. Back to so when Theodosius dies, he divides the empire between his two sons, Honorius and Arcadius. Honorius, 395 to 423, receives the west, while Arcadius, 395 to 408, received the east, and so the Roman Empire would never be rejoined again. The Latin West would fall in 476, and the Greek East would fall in 1453. There's a difference. 476 for the West, 1453 in the East. So we talk about the fall of Rome. What exactly are we talking about? Meanwhile, the barbarians overran the Latin West and were defeating the Romans in battle after battle. But I thought it's a Christian empire now. Aren't they supposed to win the battles? I know. The Visigoths descended down into Italy and sacked Rome in 410, a victory that greatly eroded Roman pride and resolve. But the Visigoths did not remain in Rome, ending up moving to Toulouse and then expanding down into Spain. Regardless, the Visigoths weakened the defenses of Gaul and even Italy itself. And as a result, the gates of the Alps were open to even more barbarians coming in. The Vandals also arrived, moving through Gaul, entering Spain, taking over Andalusia, and then crossing over to North Africa, and of course threatening, being threatening force, heading for where St. Augustine is. The Anglo-Saxon and Jutes invaded Britain, while so they came there. The emperors, of course, the Latin West, until their end in 476, were not very capable. They're often at the mercy of their advisors. When Honorius came to the throne, he was only 10 years old and was under the guardianship of Flavius Stilicho, who was half Vandal, but a very capable and loyal general for the Romans, considering himself to be as much a Roman by virtue of service as in any other empire. Let's go to the next image. Oh yeah, this is a great map. Notice the movement of the various groups here. You could see the movement of the Goths, the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, the Picts, the Scots, as they're moving through, swooping through the Western Roman Empire. But you notice not a lot is going on in the Eastern Roman Empire. It seemed to be secure. So much of the barbarian invasions, even though they did attack the Eastern Roman Empire, you can see very much visibly here that it's the West that ends up being the focus for lots of reasons. Let's go to the next image. There's Stilicho. So what we're having now is many barbarians are moving in and they're seeing themselves as Romans. By 402, Stilicho and others decided that the Roman imperial capital should be transferred from Milan to Ravenna. So let's go to the next image. Now, these are my pictures, which was located along the Adriatic, having a great port on the seaward side and a very defensible swamp on the landward side. I'll go to the next image. So you have a series of beautiful churches. This is my photo. It's a little blurred. That was located there. Let's go to the next image. It's beautiful. That one turned out really well. So it's a beautiful capital. Okay, thank you for showing that. So when Honorius got a little older, he married Stilicho's daughter, securing this political relationship by blood. While Stilicho remained in power, the Latin West was able to fend off their barbarian enemies for the most part. That is until the Rhine River froze on December 31st, 406, allowing the Vandals, the Alans, and the Suevi to easily cross to the other side with all their forces. Gaul was devastated. Next, Britain revolted, declaring this general Constantine III as Roman emperor, and everything just becomes a giant mess. Stilicho faced a lot of commotion. Stilicho, in fact, intervened. Alaric is causing problems. He pays off Alaric. But what happened is that many viewed Stilicho as just another German. The Roman army mutinied and proceeded to decapitate Stilicho, as well as kill the wives and children of the German Federati in Italy. About 30,000 of the men, many of them having lost their entire families, fled to Alaric across the Alps. Everything is a complete mess. And meanwhile, then, of course, Rome is sacked in 410. Let's go to the next image. So Rome is sacked. So on August 24th, 410 CE, the walls were breached and Rome was officially sacked. In the 5th century, Procopius records that when Honorius' eunuch informed him that Rome was destroyed, the rather dim-witted emperor thought he was referring to his favorite hen, who was also coincidentally named Roma, and cried out, "How could it be? She just ate out of my hand." Man. Concerning the weakness of the Western Roman Empire just prior to the sack of Rome, Peter Brown notes, perhaps the most basic reason for the failure of the imperial government in the years between 380 to 410 was that the two main groups in the Latin world, the senatorial aristocracy and the Catholic Church, disassociated themselves from the fate of the Roman army that defended them. Both groups unwittingly sapped the strength of the army and of the imperial administration, and having hamstrung their protectors, they found somewhat to their own surprise that they could do without them. The disappearance of the Western Empire, therefore, was the price for survival of the Senate and the Catholic Church. So you have this big, huge mess. Valentinian the third succeeded Honorius to the throne, ruling as the Western Roman Emperor from 423 to 455. But you have, of course, Valentinian III's mother, Gallia Placidia, married to a Visigoth king, ruled her son as well. During his rule, the Huns, who had been pushing the Germans from behind for the last 2 centuries, finally arrived in the Western Roman Empire. Let's go to the next image. No, it's not one, it's the other. So here comes the Huns. Oh, You see how everything's related. The Huns were originally from Mongolia. They were known as the Shan Yu by the Chinese. It must be remembered that traffic always kind of moves east to west in the steppe lands, especially southern Russia, Ukraine. By 450, Attila was one of the most powerful people in Europe, and so everyone paid tribute to him. As for the head of the Huns at this time, Attila, he didn't believe in compromise, at least at first, except that he didn't want to fight a war against the Romans and Germans at the same time. So what he did is he formed a temporary peace pact with the Eastern Roman Empire. Next, he entered an alliance with some of the Germans, namely the Vandals. Accordingly, the Vandal king Genseric asked Attila to attack his Visigoth rivals in Gaul. So in 450 CE, Attila the Hun invaded Gaul. The Roman general Aetius created a great coalition, inclusive of both Visigoths and Burgundians, for a greater enemy threatened them all. So for now, their former disputes were on hold. That's right, Roman and barbarian, side by side, fought against the Huns. The Battle of the Catalonian Plains of 451 saw the Roman general Aetius fighting side by side with the Visigoth king Theodoric I against Attila and all his forces. And in the end, the Roman-German alliance defeated the Huns. But Attila was not to be stopped just yet, for next he invaded Italy, destroying Aquileia and Verina in the north. While Aetius was nearby, he was still trying to gather strength for another attack, having lost so many of his troops in the last engagement. It looked as if Rome would be sacked again. Desperate, Valentinian III sent out Pope Innocent I, along with an embassy, to deal with Attila. For some strange reason, Attila agreed not to attack Rome. By this point, the Pope, in many ways, had become Mr. Rome in Western Europe, and because of his association with the church rather than the state, was viewed as able to rationally intercede between barbarians and the Romans. So why not the Huns? Naturally, Christian sources give credit to the success of this mission to the Pope Innocent I, but other factors need to be considered as well. For example, Attila's troops had fallen victim to the plague, weakening their ability to attack. Most notably, the Eastern Roman Emperor Marcian was attacking his new homeland along the Danube. Heading back to deal with the situation, Attila died in Pannonia in 453. The Huns eventually settled in Hungary. As a point of trivia, the Magyars' 10 tribes, the word for that, became part of the word Hungary and not the Huns, even though it does kind of sound the same. Now, Valentinius, of course, turned against Aetius in 454, viewed as a potential threat, and ran him through with a sword as the general was reading to him a financial report. So so now things go a little faster. Let's go to the next image. Not very good coin here, right? So the succession of emperors went quickly after that, with Avitus, Majoran, Libius Severus, Anthemius, who I'm related to, along with Theodosius, Albrius, and Glinus, running one after the other. The next Roman emperor was a certain Julius Nepos. Now, in the Latin West, a German always occupied by that point the very powerful office of Magister Officium. Finally, one Magister Officium by the name of Orestes appointed his own teenage son, Romulus Augustulus, as emperor, declaring that Julius Nepos was no longer occupying the imperial throne. Next, Odoacer, the new head of the German Federati, decided to overthrow little Romulus Augustulus, who was a teenage kid at that time, but declaring himself as patrician and master of the offices in 476, but not making himself emperor instead. According to the anonymous Valsinius II, written around 526, Odoacer quote, taking pity on his youth, unquote, placed Romulus Augustulus on an annual pension of 6,000 solidi a year and sent him to Campania to live with his relatives. The latter information agreeing with both Jordanes, a 6th century bureaucrat, and Marcinius Combes, a Latin chronological person for the 6th century. Romulus Augustulus moved into the Lucullus Villa, recently fortified by Valentinian III, located on an island off the Bay of Naples, and that is now a peninsula where stands the castle today. So I just want to mention that, yeah, that's the end of the Roman Empire. You have a teenage kid that's the son of a German that's retired to Campania. Well, many scholars will contend that Julius Nepos, go to the next image, was still officially emperor, making this a non-event in the Greek East. But here's the thing is this guy, he's killed anyway in 480. And so therefore, it is believed at that point that the Roman emperor of the East becomes the Roman emperor of all these territories. Of course, Odoacer, so you could end that image. That's great. So Odoacer did not last long. Theodoric came to power after that, the Ostrogoth, and he is an Arian Christian. You can see there's lots of problems going on here. But the Western Roman Empire has fallen. It is gone, right? Now, there was still a last gasp of intellectual movements going on, even though the empire in the West was gone. You have Boetius writing his Consolation of Philosophy, which, by the way, he wrote from jail, as well as Cassiodorus writing. So we do have some intellectual things going on in the 6th century. But for the most part, the Western Empire has fallen, the Latin West. Now let's go into some of the causes for this. So this is, of course, we're kind of wrapping things up. I want to go into some causes. And let's go here right now. Okay, so as I mentioned, let's talk about the West, because the East is continuing on. We'll be talking about that in a few seconds too. In 410, as I mentioned, the once proud city of Rome succumbed to the rabble of pillaging. The Visigoths were under a very determined barbarian, as we mentioned, Alaric. As the barbarians looted even the gold from the roof of the temple of Jupiter upon the Capitoline Hill, the dignity of the Roman Imperium seemed likewise as stripped of prestige, of power, of its ancient potency. Not since the sack made by the Gauls in the 4th century BCE had Rome suffered such a humiliating defeat by the non-Romans. Yet this inglorious sack was only a portent of events to come, of disasters that would soon follow. Now, news of the sack of Rome spread quickly throughout the Roman world as a fanciful impossibility received the sting of not only possibility, but actuality. Rome had been humbled, attacked by hostile invaders who lacked the distinctive mark of what was predetermined as civilization. After the initial shock, the next question began to stir forth of how this cataclysmic disaster could have happened. Who could have permitted such a disgrace? Who was not doing their duty, their job of protecting the capital of an empire once believed to encompass the very best of the known world? And what of the higher powers? What of divine protection? How could the eternal city receive such a finite blow without heavenly or Olympian consent? Why did Rome fall so soon after the emperors and so many of the populace of the Roman Empire had actually accepted Christianity? Was not the Christian God protecting Rome? Did he not care for the honor and dignity of the great city of the seven hills? Was the Christian God maybe to blame? Were the Christians to blame themselves? Accusations began to fly, denials returned, and the tumult increased. Many said the old gods of Rome were angry with the city, with the empire, because they were abandoned, neglected in favor of this upstart non Roman deity. Many began to believe that they may have made a mistake, trusting this foreign Jewish god over that of the gods who had always traditionally been the object of their veneration, seeing them through victory after victory against their enemies and bringing the empire to its greatest extent and its greatest glory. But now that we're a Christian empire, we're crumbling, we're falling. As for the Christians, where were they? So many had abandoned their public duties, their benevolent acts of civic patronage, and sought after ascetic life of self-denial and of living in monasteries or hovels or even in caves. They were not around. Those so endowed with a bounty of wealth, so no, they no longer bestowed their fruits to dedicate great public works or to commission monuments to the glory of Rome or even to improve the roads. No, they were more interested in giving their money over to the church to create more of these religious centers, these places of spiritual refuge that were thought to ultimately distract people from the affairs of this life, of this world, in favor of another world, a world they could not see but believed in faith to exist. It was to this world and not to Rome that so many Christians owed their allegiance. And so foreigners began to fill the ranks of the army. And civic patronage declined as many of the cities in the Latin West, in particular, fell into ruin. Many thought it was only a matter of time before this cancer of negligence would reach the capital. But even they did not expect the dramatic attack upon Rome in 410 CE, but it happened. And now people were looking for answers, and St. Augustine was there with an answer. Let's go to the next image. Let's pick the kind of a sour looking Augustine here for this one. There he is, looking dour as usual, right? Augustine not only took note of the Visigoths subduing Rome, but also barbarians known as the Vandals devastating his own regions about North Africa, getting closer and closer, day by day, to his own town of Hippo. He responded with a passionate work, articulating his particular worldview of what was going wrong and right in the universe, and that's known as the City of God. The City of God was published over a period of time from 416 to 422 and was contained within 22 books. In the very modern sense of the word, the City of God was a bestseller read by all types of people, wealthy landowners, soldiers, clergymen, and farmers. All wished to know how to respond to this crisis. In the City of God, Augustine vigorously told his audience that they were not to look at temporal things, to cities that will ultimately turn to dust, but to invest themselves in treasures that will last forever, treasures stored in heaven and not on earth. He declared that Babylon fell, and so would Rome, mere corrupt monuments made by impure hands with impure hearts and desires that were hubristic in the extreme, leading to their own delusion and fall, by which they would be judged in the end. Why wrap oneself temporarily in the vainglory of man and his earthly city when you could be eternally adorned with the heavenly Jerusalem that would be the home of the chosen people? For Augustine, history was a linear movement leading up to the culmination of the incarnation of Christ and the realization of a Christianity community here on earth. But for him, the next step was to move from this mundane realm in thought to the celestial visions of a life hereafter. Adam's fall in the Garden of Eden had trapped humanity within the shackles of sin and condemned all to dwell in a wicked world of suffering and pain. But that was now changing, according to Augustine, for he believed that Christianity was defeating the very evil that kept humanity imprisoned in the first place. He even said that Christianity blunted the potentially sharp aggression of the barbarians by resurrecting in them, these barbarians, a feeling of mercy and justice. What? I know, I know. While the Roman world wrestled with the sack of Rome, Augustine reminded them how merciful the Visigoths had actually been in the face of potential evil. They could have invoked to the highest degree in their hearts had they not been touched by God. He declared that they had been most merciful, even permitting churches to stand unscathed and allowing Christians to live who sought safety behind their grand edifices. He says it was not that Rome and the Roman sense of order and law had no purpose. Augustine believed that the political state of Rome was there to maintain an orderly environment because of humanity's penchant for sin. For Augustine, the laws that governed the Roman Empire were indeed ultimately divinely revealed to keep the sins of humanity in check so that people may be less distracted from their quest for the heavenly city, which is the city of God. The Greeks and Romans had created the perfect environment as ordained by God for Christianity to thrive and to grow. So, in a sense, the pagan world created the stage that would lead to the main act, that act being played by Christians. Augustine believed that Rome was allowed to survive so long because, well, God had willed it to be so. Obviously, the world of Rome, with its laws, was not perfect from his perspective, far from it. For starters, the Romans venerated gods that he believed were false or viewed as brutal, evasive, and often fickle. And he also talked against, of course, the ideas of slavery. Augustine also abhorred other vices of Roman society, and he was very outspoken about it. He also believed that many of the so-called wars of the Romans were not waged because of self-defense and were in no way just wars. Augustine saw four motivating pursuits as contributed to the wicked city of man. He said, first of all, it's power. He says honor. He says it's wealth, and he says it's sex. Okay. While each in and of itself was not necessarily evil, Augustine determined that the exclusive drive to attain any one of these four pursuits beyond that of achieving positive social goals was destructive, leading to vices of the worst kind. For Augustine, there are two kinds of people as there were two kinds of cities. Those people who lived by the dictates of the flesh would be damned to hell, while those who lived in the spirit would receive the glories of heaven. It's either this way or that way. Augustine saw the city of man as the realm of obedience, the place where the pleasures of the flesh without restraint are embraced and passions of the heart, unmitigated desire go unchecked. Well, in response, of course, Christians were to offer an alternative to this wicked city, the city of God, right? So for him, he said, well, this doesn't matter. So for Augustine, city of God became synonymous with the worldview of the Latin West. It became synonymous. So his view becomes synonymous. So why should we put our treasures in? And of course, these ideas were already there before Augustine. He articulated so well, it really did add to it. So why invest in the city of God? I'm sorry. Why invest in the city of man? Why should we? So this became, why not invest in the city of God? So what happens is, why, if you are a wealthy person, right? Why should you invest in the city of man? Why should you invest in the aqueduct? Why should you invest in building up the streets? Why should you invest in any kind of public works? You're supposed to invest in the city of God. So build a church, build a monastery. You have that concept. And then of course, the other thing is, okay, why would you want to be a soldier? Why would you be a soldier for the city of man? Why not instead be a priest or a monk or something else? So what happens is that a lot of Romans don't even want to be part of the army. Another reason why they start substituting German federati to take their place, putting on their barbarian heads with their hair unfurled everywhere, these helmets, trying to look like a Roman as much as they can with their beard sticking out. So you're having this. So this is the mess of the West. But what about the East? What's going on in the East? Let's go there. Let's go to the next image. Now, for what was known as the Eastern Roman Empire, however, and what will become known as the Byzantine Empire, after the 19th century scholars determined a new label for this very misunderstood power, the idea of a division between church and state, between the celestial city of God and the wicked city of man, did not exist. That was not their view in the East. For the Greek East, church and state were commingled as one. This premise of unity between the two realms is described by the historian Eusebius, who was a close confidant of Constantine the Great, and even wrote his official life story along with that of the history of the church up to his time. Eusebius believed in the maxim, as in heaven, so on earth. And so the city of God, so to speak, had descended upon earth and was being made manifest through those who were believers. As for the person of the emperor, he was not viewed as managing a vile and evil world as defined by faulty laws that stemmed ultimately from God, but had become corruptible. No. For those in the Greek East, the emperor was viewed as the living icon of Christ himself, the image of the perfect upon earth, reigning in splendor over God's people. His court reflected that of the heavenly court, as Eusebius declared, crowned in the image of the heavenly kingdom, gazing upward, he steers and guides humans on earth according to the pattern of his prototype. From this perspective, as the celestial order is defined and dictated by the precepts of God, so the terrestrial order is defined and dictated by the precepts of the emperor. The Eastern Roman emperors were quite aware of their great responsibility as established by Constantine in the 4th century, as he transformed his imperial designation of Pontifex Maximus, that of being the head of the Roman religion, from a pagan to a Christian orientation, a process, of course, not complete until Theodosius I. As Constantine himself notes, "What higher duty have I in virtue of my imperial office than to dissipate errors and to suppress rash indiscretions, and so to cause all humans to offer Almighty God true religion, honest concord, and due worship." Unquote. As for the city of Constantinople, that would become the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. Many of those in the Greek East viewed this terrestrial city as the New Jerusalem, with Hagia Sophia, that you're seeing right here in this image, the famous church, as its temple. And when the Emperor Justinian looked upon the newly rebuilt church, he declared, "O Solomon, I have outdone you." Right? So undo the image there. That's great. So the Greek East truly became a permanent, separate political entity from the Latin West in the year 395, when the first emperor Theodosius died, and according to his will, as I said, divided the empire between his two sons, with Arcadius receiving the east and Honorius the west, while as early as the Emperor Diocletian, the Roman Empire was divided in half and into 3 parts under the sons of Constantine, as well as the division of 395 was permanent. Okay, so that means the Latin West will fall in 476 or 480, while the Greek East would continue on until the year 1453, when Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Turks. Of course, the gulf between the two cultures in a Roman sense was already apparent in the 4th century. By the 5th century, the Greek East and Latin West were not only going their separate ways politically, but even culturally and spiritually. Latin, once the main language of administration and law of the Roman Empire, decreased in use in the Greek East, and after the reign of Justinian in the early 6th century, fell out of official use for the most part, and especially by the end of the 6th century. Meanwhile, the decrease in the knowledge of Greek amongst politicians and religious leaders alike was already quite rudimentary as early as the 5th century of the Latin West. The Second Ecumenical Council of the Church, the first held at Nicaea in 325 and the last one held at Nicaea in 787, was constantly plagued by conflicts between Greeks and Latin interpretations of Christian doctrine. They just could not agree at all, right? At all. Also, as can be seen, the Latin West, despite its variety of kings, was under the control of the Pope, while the Greek East was under the power of the emperor and the patriarch, who was the counterpart of the emperor in Greek East, but was not as powerful. For the Greek East, the realm as overseen by the emperor as God's vice regent on earth was a prototype reflecting the image and so demonstrates Platonism pure and simple. Everything is about continuity of the advancement of God's sacred order coming to fruition here on earth that will ultimately transcend into the heavenly realm that will be fully realized. So that means is that people are going, hey, since we are supposed to be invested in this world, which is very different from the West, what happens is as follows. Do we if you are wealthy and you want to invest money, because Constantinople is understood as the New Jerusalem, and because the Eastern Roman Empire, or the Roman Empire when there's no West, is the new Israel, then, of course, it becomes respectable to invest in the public realm. It's, to help support the administration. It becomes respectable to invest money to build roads, to keep up aqueducts, right? To build public works, to be fully engaged in public life. It's okay because this is, after all, the New Jerusalem, and everything is changing now towards their goal in the future, which is, of course, the heavenly kingdom. So if you're a soldier, I'm sorry, if you are if you make a decision between joining the army or becoming a monk, in this case, you can join the army if you want, because you are soldiers fighting for the kingdom of God, which is, of course, the Eastern Empire, Byzantium, right? So it becomes respectable to be in the army. So it turns out that the Eastern Roman Empire has a glass half full perspective that supports the idea of investing in life in the here and now with a very strong spiritual purpose. Conversely, in the West, it's the opposite. The idea is everything's going to be destroyed. We need to disassociate ourselves completely from this world, and let's have nothing of it. And as a result of that, everything falls apart. It's all about mentality. The mentality of the West very directly helps contribute to the fall of the West in 476. But the optimism of the East greatly contributes to the continuing of this great empire all the way to 1453. It really gives credence to the power of positive thinking, right? For the Greek East, humanity was advancing towards God here and now, transforming in this life towards the things of the spirit, to the things of the world to come. So much of this view is about immediacy or immediate eschatology, with the spirit transforming the flesh into a holy substance presentable to God. This theology also corresponds well with the view of humanity as mentioned in the Gospel of John. And that's, of course, that's to be expected because Johannine Christians predominate in the Greek East. For the Latin West, humanity is completely depraved in the flesh, must deny the material and embrace the spirit. But that transformation will not occur in this life. It will occur in the next life after death. In essence, you have to deny the wicked flesh, as so often espoused by the Apostle Paul in his letters. In many cases, you have to remove yourself from the temptations of the flesh to become pure in your heart and mind. And so many ascetic practices aimed at beating down the evil flesh so that the spirit may grow in strength. Many scholars have noted the dichotomy between a Johannine Greek East and a very Pauline Latin West. You see what's going on here. It is so much about mentality. Of course, what will happen is various theological issues will start coming up again, fighting between the East and the West as well, but also contributing factors that will lead eventually to the fall of the Eastern Roman Empire. But let's go ahead, and I'll kind of want to, well, kind of tempted to go different ways here. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about the medieval period. The dividing line between the ancient world and that has been determined as a medieval period or the Middle Ages is very much blurred. The concept of the medieval period was born sometime at the beginning of the Renaissance, around the 14th century. The Italians are first to cook up this idea. They saw the times of the Greeks and Romans as one of more sophistication, the flowering of civilization, and they in the Renaissance saw their own time as a revival of the Greek Latin literary culture as well as art and architecture. And then they observed this gap in the middle. By the 18th century, Christopher Keller wrote a history of the world that started from creation. It was divided into three sections: ancient, middle, and modern. He wrote in Latin. And so the idea stuck. Actually, it is medieval from the Latin. Of course, no one in that period saw themselves as living in any kind of Middle Age. Up until 1982, the Medieval Academy spelled the word medieval as well. so when does it start? When is the end of this ancient world, the beginning of the Middle Ages? The dates vary. Anything from 300 or earlier to roughly 1350, or perhaps a little later. The reign of the Roman Marcus Aurelius is the first candidate for the beginning of this time period. He was the last of the good emperors, was famous for writing his meditations. But it was also during his reign that the barbarians began to invade the empire as pushed from behind by the Huns. And while the Romans managed to push them back, at first, the streams of invasions was really relentless after that. So the Roman Empire had to start accommodating them and permitting them to settle on their side of the frontier. Eventually, of course, the Latin West will fall to them, but the Greek East will survive, barely. So that's one candidate. So Marcus Aurelius. The next one is for the beginning of the Middle Ages is Constantine, with the Battle of the Milvian Bridge and the legalization of Christianity. So the next one, the third candidate, is Theodosius I, who was the last emperor to have a unified empire and who had it divided between his sons, who would rule the Latin West and the Greek East separately. He was also the emperor that made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. And so they declare that the beginning of the Middle Ages. There is another view that it is the sack of Rome in 410. That's when it starts. Others will say, no, it's 476 when the Western Roman Empire falls. The latest typical date will be, although I've seen people do way later, it'd be crazy. I'll just say the latest date people will have was 632 CE with the arrival of Islam. Whatever the interpretation of when the Middle Ages began, it is clear that a great transformation in the political, economic, cultural, and religious climate was happening in the 5th century or the 400s. And of course, we have to ask the question, did Rome actually fall? Well, the city of Rome is there today. In the 5th century, the western part was occupied, controlled, and manipulated by non-Romans and barbarian kings pulling the strings, and for a while acting like the Romans were in power, but placing puppet Roman emperors in charge, while the real authority was the newcomers to the Latin West pulling all the strings. By the 5th century, there was no Roman imperium in the Latin West. And so the conclusion is that Rome at that time was not really at all Roman in that sense as a governing authority. As mentioned, following the death of Emperor Theodosius I, the Roman Empire was divided in half, right? But these are just the Western Roman emperors are really ineffectual. Is it ridiculous to ask when Rome fell? Here we go. My last bit. I realize we see scenes in movies, on television, on the internet of a Rome just before its fall, with Romans living a life of debauchery, of depravity. This image was often conjured up as a moral object lesson to keep people in line, to keep them as good citizens, because look what happened to Rome. And this could happen to us today if we allowed ourselves to fall into the pleasures of the flesh and the love of materialism. But in truth, morally, the Roman Empire was quite conservative. They view themselves as pious in the 4th and 5th centuries. They're not really that debaucherous at all. They weren't that corrupt. Well, they're corrupt politically, but they weren't exactly living it up because there wasn't much food. And of course, any kind of interaction with other people was frowned upon. So anyone who talks about the immorality of Rome leading to the fall of the empire could just say boo. For most of them were Christians, and quite conservatively so. The supposed fall of the Roman Empire, presumed to have happened sometime during the 5th century, is actually one-sided, literally. As you see, the Western Roman Empire, the Latin half, experienced the collapse of society during the 5th century, but the Eastern Roman Empire, the Greek half, continued on for another 1,000 years. As for the city of Rome itself, in the Western half, although the Senate still met there, the Roman emperors of the West had long left the capital for Milan and later on Ravenna, making that the center of their imperium. The collapse of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century is often viewed as the end of classical antiquity and the beginning of the Middle Ages. Again, qualifications must be made. For the Eastern Roman Empire, it was actually a pretty good century, with roads repaved, great public structures rebuilt or built, and in some cases, a higher standard of living than the previous century. For instance, the city of Ephesus underwent an urban renewal project during this period of time, with a brand new colonnaded road moving from the theater to the harbor and dedicated to the Emperor Arcadius. So things are better, in the East. In the 6th century, the Eastern Roman Empire became strong again militarily, right? It was able to retake much of their materials. Did you guys realize under Justinian, much of the Western Roman Empire was retaken by the Eastern Roman Empire and just became the Roman Empire? That's right. The Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, it took Italy. It retook Italy, much of it. It retook parts of North Africa. It took part of Spain. So here we go. The reason for the fall of the Western Roman Empire was actually a combination of factors. Now that I've qualified that, let's go into it. And I'm going to go through it, and this will be our conclusion. First, number one, the fall of the Western Roman Empire was a result of the increase in epidemics that ravaged the empire since the end of the 2nd century. depleting populations, especially in the urban center, places where close quarters allowed diseases such as the measles and smallpox to wipe out people in quick succession. The shrinking of the general population is confirmed through archaeological excavations, where many cities shrink into towns and even into villages during the 3rd century, with a small increase in the 4th century and a very sharp decline for the West in the 5th century. Cities were literally emptied of their citizens. This is not what happens in the East, but it happens in the West. It happens temporarily in the East, but then it goes back up again. So this is the second. This decrease, so you got less people. Now, follow this if you will. You got less people. This decrease in population led to, a decrease in tax revenues. With less people, you have less people paying taxes and less people able to support the complex infrastructure of the empire, the administration and public works. And so the roads fell into disrepair. The aqueducts broke down, and water no longer refreshed many towns and cities, and public buildings began to fall into disrepair and collapse. Why? Not enough people to pay taxes to keep all this going. I also want to mention something about the water. Remember, the Romans used to bathe. They used to bathe every day, right? That was a habit. You go to in the afternoon, you take your nice bath, you go ahead and you just get the steam bath, the hot bath, the refrigerarium. It's wonderful. Great bath every day. Did you guys know in the West that many of those in religious circles, even the East a little bit, mostly in the West though, spread information, pamphlets about the sin of bathing, the sin of going to the baths where all kinds of depravity occurs. No, if you're a sinner, you go to these kinds of establishments. So what happens is people stop taking regular baths every day because they can't afford it otherwise. Well, and what also helped it along is the aqueducts were destroyed or not maintained, and so water stopped flowing them in any way. So what happens now is people aren't washing. If they're not washing, they're not clean. If they're not clean, let's play the bacteria game, shall we? People are getting sick more. People are actually getting more ill in the West, which of course continues to knock down that population. So there you have it. But once again, so fresh water is being cut back. Aqueducts, as I said before, are either destroyed intentionally by barbarians who feel bad afterwards. They want to repair it because they don't really want to destroy a city that they want to live in later on. But anyway, but it's expensive to repair them. And so what happens is less taxes, less people, less people, less taxes. Let's go to the third one. The third, with a decrease in population, less soldiers were able to defend the West, and so to supplement this loss of manpower, other than the ethos that was espoused by such people as Augustine. German mercenaries were brought in as legions. The problem is these German recruits had divided loyalties between the Romans and their compatriots. And so, because what happens is they usually fought with their tribes to defend and protect. And so the problem is that in the battlefield, if they're fighting their fellow tribesmen, sometimes they just decided, you know what? The battle's not looking very good. I think I'm going to join them against the Romans. So you have these turncoat barbarians. Fourth, changes in religious values because of tough times influenced many to become retrospective concerning the worries of the world and the distractions of the flesh. While in the old days, many were encouraged to become a part of public life and to endow public works, now the ideal became to retreat from the world, to become a religious cleric or a holy man, or if you happen to be wealthy, that surplus should be spent on on the poor or to building churches and monasteries, but not urban renewal programs. Edward Gibbon believed that one of the causes for the fall of the Roman Empire was Christianity. He did. But here's the problem, as I quoted at the beginning of the talk. But here's the problem. But life went on as usual in the Greek East. That is, until the arrival of Islam, there were some problems. So what happened, or I should say, didn't happen in the Greek East? First of all, they were not overrun by barbarians to the extent of the Latin West. And when the Germans came knocking at the door, Eastern Roman emperors would say, hey, why don't you go over to the West? Also, they had enough resources to be able to properly bribe them. Second, the Eastern Roman Empire was better defended and easier to defend. Third, the East retained enough of the population to ensure their strength in a military sense. The Eastern Roman province of Syria had a population around 8 million. Fourth, the infrastructure was better organized, the roads in good repair, able to move troops and supplies at a moment's notice, while the Goths were often advisors for the Roman emperors in both the Greek East and the Latin West, which angered many. Eventually, the East brought in those known as Isaurians into advisory positions in the court to counterbalance the Germans. Unlike the Goths, the fierce Isaurians were still natives of the empire itself. Fifth, the religious emphasis that Constantinople was the new Jerusalem and Hagia Sophia, the new temple, that Christ's kingdom above was reflected in the empire below, gave those in the Greek East the desire to participate in the world here and now. This present-mindedness encouraged these Roman citizens to invest in activities beyond that of the church, inclusive of retaining aspects of ancient civic life. So I'm giving you the answer. And the answer is, did Christianity contribute to the fall of the Roman Empire? And the answer is, it contributed to the fall of the Roman Latin West. Absolutely. But Christianity contributed to the survival of the Greek East. So the answer is yes for the West, no for the East, and in fact enables a better survival for the East. Isn't that interesting? It all depends on how you look at it. It also all depends on geography and economic strength and all these other factors. So there's never, ever a simplistic answer that is all-inclusive. But yes, absolutely. Christianity, the former Christianity in the Latin West, did create a mindset, almost a defeatist kind of mindset, to the point where I actually feel sorry for the barbarians. They actually write about it too. They arrive because they're conquering the Western Roman Empire because they want to take share in the goods. They want to be part of the prosperity. They want to contribute to it. They don't want to destroy everything and then have nothing except for the Vandals. They're an exception. But yeah, the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, they want, and they're kind of disappointed. Theodoric is kind of like, hey, come on, guys, wake up, the Ostrogoths, come on, and they try their best. They cut their hair, wear Roman outfits, they embrace Roman culture. They try to build monumental architecture, not very good at it. They're trying to come on, you guys, come on. And the Western Romans are like, they don't have the will anymore. It's like, oh, no, I don't care, and the barbarians are, please care. You know, we didn't want to create a desert and have nothing. We wanted to have the goods too. So yeah, I kind of feel sorry. Um, in any case, think about this. Two ways of looking at this. The Western Roman Empire falls. The Western Roman Empire falls with a teenage kid, Romulus Augustulus, retired with a pension. It doesn't fall with a bang, it falls with a whimper. The Eastern Roman Empire falls in 1453 with another Constantine, emperor, fighting valiantly before the walls of Constantinople, before the Golden Gate, fighting the Ottoman Turks and dying as a result. Do you see a difference? You do see a difference, right? It's all about mindset. So, and there you have it. The answer to the question that I brought up at the beginning of the talk when it comes to Christianity in relation to the fall of the Roman Empire. And the answer, as I said before, is yes for the West and no for the East. Thank you so much. And have a great evening.